Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant from apes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts in the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
Welcome to the Weimar Republic, a height of lies and corruption, degeneracy disguised as seduction, communist cries to own nothing, facilitating their own destruction.
Welcome to Weimar with Wi-Fi. Filth disguised as art for a high price. No regard for life like a drive-by. Eyes wide, watching our culture decay. Haunted by our ancestors' graves. They gave their lives for us. Now they look down from above with disgust. All their children hooked on drugs. Being fucked by politicians, greed and lust. Parasites that feed on us. Left and right, they're all corrupt. A system built on lies that must fall to dust. But we want to survive. It's up to all of us.
Welcome to the Weimar Republic, a height of lies and corruption, degeneracy disguised as seduction, communist cries to own nothing, facilitating their own destruction.
Communist rainbows fill our streets. Bolsheviks bankroll, kill with disease. Women and children feed themselves by living on the knees. As history repeats, selling your body on OnlyFans to burn for the creeps. Your soul damned to suffer some freaks. Many children dismembered, victims of Hirschfield's clinic. This sickness spread worldwide. Children filled with so much poison, they're dead in the eyes. Destroyed by historical lies. Hear their cries across centuries of time.
Welcome to the Weimar Republic, a height of lies and corruption, degeneracy disguised as seduction, communist cries to own nothing, facilitating their own destruction.
This should all be concerning. Look into what books they were burning. Start learning the truth of our history, because it's written by those who claim victory. This system built on greed will leave us all in misery if we don't fight back collectively. Our roots are being torn from this earth. Our children's future born is something worse than ever before. There's no guns, but this is war. Our daughters and sons dead before they're born, orchestrated by God's chosen people. It's time to expose their horns. You've all been warned. Welcome, everybody, back to the show. This is Strange Brew Podcast. If you don't know, I'm your host, Tomcat, a.k.a. Tom Thompson, the Reptilian. That was one of the feature songs off of my new album. So go check that out and support my music. We have a reoccurring guest, one of my favorites, Ryan Gable, part of the Secret Teachings. You want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself for those that maybe haven't heard an episode with you or know about your show?
Well, thank you for having me back on your show, first of all. Second of all, as you said, my name is Ryan Gable. My show is The Secret Teachings. It's named after Manly P. Hall's greatest work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And I try to utilize anthropology, mythology, symbolism, occultism, etc., to understand current events and how they relate to historical events. My show is a mixture, a brew, if you will, of various different subjects, and they are in no way, shape, or form what you would typically hear on standard media platforms. They are very fringe, but not because they're undocumented or undefined. It's because they're actually sourced. And as we're going to talk about tonight, there are many things that you would probably be very surprised to learn that you can go to official sources and they tell you things that are much different than what the official narrative is. So sources are not always hidden. They're out in the open sometimes, and the narratives that are built around them are not always correct, and they're not always accurate as per the original source. I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll document that quite extensively tonight. So that's what I do.
And I think you're, I will, not to mean to toot your own horn, but you're one of the best at it that I've seen, especially with how you come up things really objectively. And it is funny that you, how you reference that in some regard, because I was thinking about this today and how like it is weird that if you don't conform to the narrative and you don't conform your thoughts and opinions to what you're told to believe, then they'll call it like hatred or hate speech or all these different labels that they will throw on people for just having even sometimes an adjacent opinion to like the current narrative or whatever we've been told throughout history. And one thing I always find it funny, and I've kind of referenced on the show before, is you have people that, you know, in the whatever you want to call this, the conspiracy world, the truther world, the truth seekers, and you'll have these same people that will understand what's going on with Epstein and other layers of the government being corrupt, but then they'll refuse to look at history on the other side of the coin, so to speak. They'll claim to be awake, but not and then questioning things, but yet they will not question history.
I think the same thing is certainly true in the United States, where we have a 62% Christian population, different denominations. And Christians, as my audience hears me ramble on about all the time, Christians are not people that I dislike. I don't reject Christianity. I don't embrace it either. But I find it strange that I myself am one of the few people who are not a Christian who staunchly defends Christianity, because I look at Christian doctrine and I'm confused by what the average Christian in the United States backs and supports. That it's the same thing that you just described, where you would, on average, as a Christian, be opposed to pornography. You'd probably be, as a more conservative person, probably be opposed to behaviors in society that would be considered whorish or slutty, hookup culture, etc. You'd probably be opposed to open borders. You probably want to have maybe a secure border, and you'd want to have no drugs on the street. And yet Christians tend to support not just the candidates, but the very individuals that finance those candidates that push all of those things. And I don't even know if they recognize it, or if they recognize it, but because a verse in Genesis tells them to bless those people, that it's somehow acceptable and okay. I haven't really figured that one out yet, but it's similar to what you're saying. It's a strange thing.
I have family that has been, I don't know how to put the brainwashed. I don't want to be too mean, but like that, I have family that is Christian, and I try to show them contrary evidence, the things they've been told, and try to sway away from this. Like, I get that there is an issue with some of the Muslim populations and stuff like that. I get that there's factions of them coming into Europe that are destroying Europe. Like, I get it. And I get there's more violent, but this scapegoat of always it's the Muslims and never focusing on the very same people that, at least with the Muslim religions, they still believe Jesus is a prophet. They believe he plays a part in their religion. But if you look at what some of the chosen people, Jews or whatever, what they believe about Jesus, is that he's burning alive in his own poopy, his own excrement and semen and stuff, according to the Talmud, right? So it is weird, because then you try to show them that stuff and you're like, but this is what they think of you, your savior, your God in the flesh. And it's just, it is weird. It's like a hypocritical,
and it is a byproduct of a generation. As an individual, you go through a generation of your life, say about 10 years of your life, learning, the core principles of what you think or what you believe. And then nothing else can penetrate that hard shell that's been built around who you really are. It's this like false identity, or it's a real identity. It's not false, but it's who you become. And if you show people information to the contrary, it of course conflicts with those beliefs, which are what people identify as. So it becomes a very personal problem where people lose their identity, or they could lose their identity by addressing those inconsistencies.
It is. That's what I find one of the strangest things that I've encountered in my life, because I've been aware of this stuff for a long time, is these people that still are holding on to the left-right paradigm, where I'm like, and then they just don't understand that if I call out the conservatives in Canada, they constantly pander to like foreigners. They're wearing turbans. They're doing all sorts of absurd stuff to pander to foreign diasporas that are coming into the country. So if I critique them for doing that, for not like defending the real Canadian heritage, because we do have a heritage and a national identity, and they're trying to erase it currently. And I think it's happening. It's going to start happening in Japan soon. I've heard from some of the stuff they're trying to push, even in Japan where you are. But like this high, and then they'll be like, "Well, you must be a liberal," and I'm like, "No, just because I critique the conservatives does not mean that I'm a liberal." And then if you critique the liberals, they'll call you a conservative. I'm like, I don't like either side, man.
And then you get hit with a label black pill. I really hate that one too. It's just, someone said to me one time, "You've got strange talking points." And I said, they're not talking points. They're thoughts. They're honest to God thoughts. Like, I can have those myself. They don't have to be part of some movement or group. That's not atheistic either, or anarchist. It's just, I have my own thoughts. I'm a person. I'm not part of some group identity. Yeah,
groupthink is a really big problem. Do you want to bring this up on screen?
Yeah, I shared with you so people can see what you're referring to. This is from my new book. This is from the William Davidson Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds, for the record. And God rest his soul, Charlie Kirk was given false information about those Talmuds and used to say that there are 2, but the one that they really adhere to is not the corrupted one, and that's actually not true. It's the reverse of what they told Charlie Kirk. I don't know if anybody remembers that conversation that Charlie Kirk had. It was a pretty viral comment. Anyway, if you type in GITTIN 57A, you can read this for yourself. First of all, we're told that Jesus is not in the Talmud burning in feces or excrement. That's not true. Then when you find the source, here it is on your screen, or I just gave you the information, what to type in to the William Davidson Talmud, for example, or any online Talmud. Then they say, well, it's not the same Jesus, because there are several verses or several conversations. It's what the Talmud is, or the Talmuds are. It's rabbis debating things. Of course, they don't always agree, but there's several instances of people boiling in semen or boiling in excrement. These are really lovely conversations that people have had within the rabbinical elite. And they say, well, that's not Jesus. And they pull a verse with somebody else. Like, for example, the general of Rome, Titus, is actually summoned from the dead in one of these verses. So it's necromancy on top of that. And then if you pull, it is completely crazy. And then if you pull up the actual verse, well, it's not Jesus. And then there's another verse where they're talking about somebody else. And they're like, well, we don't really think they're referring to Jesus. Okay, well, if you're going to be honest about it, we can pull up the exact verse, which is what we've done here, where it explicitly says Jesus the Nazarene. So that is the same Jesus. So it does say that. So if it's just a bunch of rabbis debating things, having a discussion, and a bunch of rabbis agreeing or disagreeing, then that's what it is. But when you deny that the text says that Jesus is burning in feces or excrement, and then you try to obscure that fact by misquoting other verses or putting them in place of what I'm referring to, that's really dishonest. And that makes me think that you're trying to conceal something else, something deeper. And you're obviously trying to conceal the exact source that you claim isn't in the book. So that makes me really highly suspicious. Nevertheless, you can see the verse here. It is a mixture of necromancy and Jesus in feces groveling to Onkelos, a guy who is converting to Judaism, groveling to him and saying that groveling to the Jewish elite, saying that you should embrace them because you want their fortune and you don't want their misfortune. So it actually does say that, contrary to popular belief.
And that's what's pretty crazy, when people want to dismiss some of this stuff. And I know you've done it recently with that episode about, like, you essentially were reacting and just speaking about, talking about the different clips of rabbis and what they say. And like, we've done the same thing. We did an episode about the Protocol Elders of Zion, and then essentially, like, it did okay. I actually stayed up on YouTube, changed the thumbnail, and they took it down instantly. So like, they don't want you to discuss this, especially because that title alone, I know already would have issues or whatever just because of these rumors they call and forgeries. But we showed tons of clips of rabbis admitting stuff like the whatever invasion of Europe or talking about how they speak about the Goyim, and it was like they're saying it. I'm not even saying it. I'm showing you what they believe in. And I was going to ask you the question: how out of percent? I know this is going to be a hard one, but like, and it just kind of like what your belief is of roughly the Jewish religion ideology. How many of them do you think out of like not to generalize, but everybody does believe in what the Talmud says, because it's not their base level of deconstructing like the Torah and stuff, so they actually understand it?
Well, yeah, this is a very complicated thing, and it doesn't matter what I say, someone's going to disagree with me, and somebody probably will agree with me. So it's complicated because there are two Talmuds, and much of this was written either from or during the times of Babylonian captivity. Much of this is a very, very lengthy response, but I'll try to keep it very simple.
That's okay.
Let's put it this way. So, roughly speaking, 1700 BC, the Jews or the Israelites were kept in captive in Egypt. I went to a Christian school. They just told us this like every day. Hey, don't forget the Jews were in captivity in Egypt, and the Egyptians were pagans, and we're Christians, and we love the Jews, etc. So it's about 1700. The Exodus is dated, depending on who you ask, could be 100 years, could be 200 years, one story from another story. Some of them are separated by 300 years. It just depends on who you ask. And when you read the Exodus story, you learn, or if you remember the Exodus story, you remember that Moses later comes down off of Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and they actually kill some Israelites who are worshiping the golden calf, Apis, who I'm pretty sure is at least related to Egyptian gods, to keep it really simple. And then, of course, they make a covenant that they break numerous times. They make a covenant with this god. But if you look at Egyptian belief, or if you look at Hindu belief for that matter, despite there being multiple gods, they all answer to a singular source. And in Egypt, the pharaohs around the time of before the Exodus, or around the time of the Exodus, were Akhenaten and his son Tutankhamun. And those two pharaohs strongly believed, one of them famously, in a monotheistic concept. So the Jews did not have, or the Israelites did not have, the concept of monotheism at the time in which they were in Egypt. They developed it, at the very least, alongside of the Egyptian development of this idea. And the same thing goes for the 10 Commandments, the Confessions of Mott in Egypt, and the Book of the Dead, or the Coming Forth by Day. These texts, both the Confessions of Mott, almost verbatim, is what you would read on those 10 Commandments that are put up in schools and we hear about all the time being the foundation of Western civilization. Well, if they're the foundation of Western civilization, then I would like to know two things. I'd like to know, number one, how the Japanese people know not to murder and steal, because they seem to be better at it than Westerners are on average. And that goes for Korea as well, and probably a lot of East Asian countries. And there's a lot of Buddhism here and a lot of non-religious people. The second thing I'd like to know is, these are supposedly divine laws, which, if they are divine laws that are given to God by the Jews, why can't the gods of Egypt give divine laws to the Egyptians? It doesn't make any sense why God only speaks to one group of people, unless that group of people claim that that God is, belongs to them, and that God is, of course, in their written record. It's texts that are written by them. It's really demented, deranged, delusional behavior to think that this entity belongs only to you. But historically, mythologically speaking, this is usually what comes out of tribes. Tribes develop this character that watches over them, and that becomes both a household and a national god. So the point is, to your question, because I apologize, I will ramble on and on.
It's
the point
okay,
is,
I like it.
the Israelites did not have a monotheistic concept or a 10 Commandment concept before Egypt. It was only after they were exposed to those things in Egypt. It's a very similar thing in Babylon. Now, I'm not saying that the entirety of the Jewish religion was fabricated from other cultures, but I think to a very large degree it was, considering these people never had a home. They were always on the move. Some authors will argue that the word Hebrew even means like desert wanderer. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that argued before. These people were nomadic, and they were held captive in Babylon at least one time over a span of centuries because they were in a state of rebellion against any kind of order. We might talk about this later because it relates to the first temple. But to your question, I say all that so that we can answer your question directly, more directly. In Babylon, they absolutely, without doubt, without question, would have been influenced by the Babylonian mystery traditions, which today are always seen as satanic and demonic. But that's probably because the Christians see them as such, and the Christians, well, Judeo-Christians, take a lot of their talking points from the modern Israelis and from the Jewish community, and they hate the Babylonians because they were held in captivity by them, and that is not something that is my opinion. That is just like their hatred of Rome is the opinion of the prime minister of Israel today and most of the Jewish leadership. They still hold a grudge against Babylon and anything that resembles it. They still hold a grudge against Rome. They still hold a grudge against Egypt.
Yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu is constantly, referencing Rome, and rabbis do this a lot. And then I know you've referenced stuff like this, and I've talked about my show is like their belief that like maybe not America is Edom, but there's they see it as kind of the same. Yeah, right. And then it there's some other, I was gonna say too, it is. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, carry on. I don't know. I had a question, but it's fine. I just left my mind.
Well, I apologize if I'm speaking too much, but
no, it's okay. It's because I was thinking about what you said, and then I don't know why, but I did lose my train of thought. It will come back.
Well, that's okay. You're.
Oh, I remembered. Okay, and then it's like, from your point of view, because we hear this a lot of like the Babylonians were evil sorcerers and stuff like that. You hear other podcasters and stuff kind of say similar ideas to this. So it is interesting because we're only getting that from the Christian, Judeo-Christian point of view. But do you think it's the same way? Because I think there's a possibility they could paint the pagans as evil, and they maybe not necessarily were, and it was just a scapegoat. So you think this is similar maybe to like the Babylonians?
Yeah, that's not to say that there aren't episodes of human sacrifice or things like that throughout history. That's all of human history. And it's as much Christian as it is Jewish, or the Abrahamic faiths, including Islam, the Muslims and the Jews both honor Abraham probably far more than the Christians do. The Muslims have a day every year in which they sacrifice an animal to Abraham. And it has something to do, if I understand this correctly, with the offering of his son Isaac on the altar to God, or to lowercase g, God. And the Jews, of course, still celebrate that. That is an example of human sacrifice, and there's no way around that. Well, he didn't make him do it. It was a test. Well, I don't know what kind of God makes you put your firstborn or secondborn or any born child on an altar and offer them up as a burnt sacrifice, but that God is a God that I reject wholly. That is something, again, you find in Islam as much as you find that in Judaism. Christianity doesn't embrace that so much, but Christianity certainly has a long history of mass murder campaigns against people that disagree with them. So this, first of all, to answer your original question, to bring this back around, much of what's in the Talmuds are discussions by rabbis on, yes, what the Torah says and what other things are happening at the time in Jewish communities. And it's basically a discussion of law. Much of it, however, was highly influenced by Babylon. Much of it was highly influenced, which is funny too, because they'll also tell you that when you read about Jesus and these horrible things in the Talmud, like raping 3-year-olds, that it's all because of the corruption of Babylon. It's like, okay, so then it did have influence on the Talmuds. Okay, to your other question, if we're looking at how, like those rabbis that you referenced, I don't think that the average Jewish person any more than the average Christian person. I think Muslims, on the other hand, absolutely on average are much more educated on their religion, especially their dedication and their prayer. That's just my opinion from what I've seen. Christians and Jews, however, absolutely, without doubt, on average, do not know what their religion is about. A lot of Jews that are proudly say that they're Jews don't practice Judaism. Yeah. Including a lot of celebrity Jews, a lot of Christians. You can go to church, call yourself a Christian, but I'll give you an example of what I mean. I had a guy that told me 2 days ago, he said, I agree with like 97% of what you say, but since you're not a Christian, you're a heretic. He used the word
Yeah,
heretic.
of course. Yeah.
So then me or anybody for that matter, it's better to have someone say, hey, I'm a Christian, but then do bad things, as opposed to someone who says I'm not a Christian, but I live that lifestyle. And I think that's a huge problem. Anyway, though, I think that what's happening here is that you have people that are Jewish people who are as abused by the Jewish leadership or the false Jewish leadership as Catholics are by the Catholic Church, or maybe other denominations like Baptists. I grew up a Baptist. Baptists are abused by the Baptist Church. What I mean by that is figurative and literal abuse. I mean, the Catholic Church is famous for the predatory behavior of priests, but so is the Baptist Church, by the way, and so are the synagogues. And you find that in every religion. So as much as you find corruption in every religion, and you find pedophilia in every religion, mainstream Abrahamic religions, that is, you also likewise find that the average person within a religion doesn't usually know what their religion is about, especially when Christianity's been reduced today to like one verse in Genesis. That's all that apparently matters.
Do you think that there's been an infiltration like the crypto Jews, or like essentially like the Sabbatean, like Frankist cult, like stuff like that, where they're like infiltrating religion? Because I've read a couple books that like they discuss this idea of like, you know, the British Empire and stuff like that. It was like hundreds of years ago, subverted, essentially corrupted by the same group of people that then would intermingle and marry within these families. Like, you know, you have the Rothschild connection to the banking system. Because I hear a lot of people being like, oh, it's the Bank of England, it's like this, it's that, it's London, it's the royal families. And I'm like, I think that they're just, they're a mechanism within the clockwork, but they're not the clock. They're not running the time, right? So what is your opinion on that? And then also, because I feel like you could get into a little bit of this before we get into the Weimar Republic, is what do you think about like the Tower of Babel and like what they were trying to achieve? So 2 questions.
So in terms of infiltrating religion, this is something that I wouldn't consider myself an expert on, only because I don't think anybody could really truly be an expert on this. I think that if we're talking about infiltration of religion, it probably boils down to what an individual perceives their religion to be, because some people might embrace those things that others would believe were corruptions. Like if you were to read some of the early writings of the church, not the church fathers, but like other writers that were writing at the time in which Christianity started to evolve. And then if you were to read the New Testament, you were to read the teachings of Jesus, what the early church was, or the early Christian communities were, which they appear to be communistic, not by the standard contemporary definition, but you had to give everything away to the early Christian community to be part of their group. You find that they were filled with a bunch of criminals, because the pagan gods of Rome, as they called them, did not just simply let people off for minor crimes or major crimes. Christianity, the origin of Christianity, the original Christians, they would allow people off for those horrible crimes as long as they believed in Jesus. And I say, so if you basically compare the New Testament the teachings of Jesus to whatever the church or the institutions are today, they're not compatible with one another. Like Christianity as a movement, I think, is entirely a contradiction of what Jesus taught. And I think the same thing goes for the Jews. What they consider to be modern Judaism is a contradiction of the Torah, unless you understand it to mean that the Torah only applies to them and everybody else is subhuman, which is what a lot of those rabbis believe. And it doesn't matter if you believe it, the rabbis believe it. It doesn't matter if the average Jewish guy at a deli in New York believes it. What matters is the rabbis that are around the Israeli government believe it. And that is who most of these rabbis are, who say horrible things like you've probably played on your show before, like I played on my show, and they talk about the destruction of America, and it's payback, just like Europe. It's payback for the quote Holocaust, or it's payback for the Roman Empire, and so on and so forth.
They'll blow it away to the wind. There's some reference of that, just scatter it to the wind and stuff like that. And it's just, I just want to add the point that it is like, it's crazy to have that type of hubris where like, I may not like, certain people may be coming into my country and pushing their culture on my people, right? We have a huge Indian problem in Canada, and they're not respectful in any way towards our people, and they like to gaslight us. And I have nothing against Indians, but we've had a lot of entitled, disrespectful people from that nation come here and then try to subvert our country, even Sikhs and stuff like that. And it's not like I inherently don't like those people or think that somehow they should just be obliterated. I would rather have my home for my own nation of what my ancestors created, and they have their subcontinent, but I would never think of people as like that they deserve to be wiped out or that they're subhuman compared to me just because of like their region of where they were born. But I do think that, yes, certain cultures aren't compatible, but the way that these people speak about the Goyim, essentially, anyone that's not Jewish, it's crazy. Like it is maniacal in a lot of regards.
It is. If you can share this screenshot. So what you're looking at now, and if you're listening only, I'll explain it. You're looking at a copy of the Zohar. It's a large text, but this is one section of the Zohar. This section describes what are referred to as the mixed multitudes. So it describes the Rephaim, the Anakim, etc. Excuse my lack of Hebrew pronunciation. I don't speak Hebrew. This is the English translation. This is from the Zohar, though. This is just one example. And in this example, we read about Amalek and the other mixed multitude I referenced. And you'll read this little line right here that says, when God reveals himself, they will be wiped off the earth. Now, there's nothing particularly intriguing or interesting or damning about that text or that verse. It doesn't say they're going to wipe the Goyim off the earth or they're going to wipe the United States off the earth. It doesn't say that. So first of all, they would deny that it even says this, just like the excrement in Jesus. But when you read this, what exactly are the mixed multitude? Well, in an occult sense, kind of like the hierarchy of angels or demons, they represent corruption or they represent virtues. So they could represent pride. They could represent, just decency. It depends on if we're looking at demons or angels. They're symbolic representations of states of mind and, again, different things like virtues or corruptible states. When you look at what these terms mean, they actually do define them. And these things are defined as, for example, pride, or they're defined as behaviors that are wicked and evil. I break all this down in the book.
And for everyone that doesn't know why we called it the Protocols of the Goyim, which even one of my buddies, that I do shows with sometimes, he even says, he's like, what a name, like, because it's like kind of perfect. But yeah, I definitely actually want to get your book. And I would love to read it because it sounds fascinating. And it's one of those, I have a big collection of books and yours would be sweet to like, I have a whole shelf next to me. It would be sweet to have it. And
it's a big book. I'll get you a copy.
Yeah, it'd be sweet. I would love to like put it in the background and stuff like that. And I will probably get right into that. I love history and stuff. And I noticed you referenced like Anakin. It's kind of an interesting because Anakin, do you think that because I heard like George Lucas and stuff like took his stuff from like Jewish writings and or ancient religions or mystery school type ideas.
Well, I mean, everything that Yoda says is basically Buddhism. If you read Dune came out, Frank Herbert's Dune came out before Star Wars, and Dune is essentially the Muslim version of that. So it's like a mixture of Buddhism and the Abrahamic faiths and Far Eastern religions and Star Wars. It's Anakim with an M, but I actually said the same thing on my show recently because my wife and I watched the Star Wars. She'd never seen all the Star Wars, so we watched them. Oh,
that's so funny.
And if you read what these mixed multitude are, Anakim, I think, is pride. It represents pride, which, of course, Anakin is extremely prideful, which is what leads to his downfall. So there's truth there in Proverbs, for the record. So anyway, the mixed multitude, it doesn't say the United States, even though the rabbis do. What it says is, corrupt or prideful, wicked people. Now, historically, this is, I think, the most critical piece of information that we could probably express tonight on the show. In lieu of what's happening geopolitically. It doesn't say directly the United States, right? It doesn't say directly like the Goyim in this particular case. Okay, so in an occult sense, we're just talking about general corruption. But we have to understand what those rabbis, what the ones you referenced, believe. And what they believe is that these names apply not just to historical people, historical groups that the Jews had conflicts with, which was absolutely everybody, including themselves, including God for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
It applies in perpetuity to anybody who ever questions, anybody who ever criticizes, anybody who ever engages in any kind of behavior that is seen as unsavory to the Jewish community throughout all time and space. So all of these terms essentially become terms that are used to label, almost like a code, to label their enemies. And if you don't believe, at least at the very higher echelons of, quote, Judaism, you don't believe that other people who are not Jews are humans, that they're cattle or that they're inferior, then these names are basically like the names that we would give to cattle. I mean, if you're in Hindu, if you're in India, you probably, see a cow as sacred. But for Americans, we don't even, unless you're a rancher, you don't even see cows. You just see hamburgers. So you reduce a life to just a meal. And I think that's how they look at things like the Giborim, Anakim, Raphaim. And if you believe, here's the key, I think, if you believe that these terms can be applied to anybody and everybody except the Jewish people, and the Zohar teaches that when the Messiah comes, that those people are going to be wiped off the earth. And they also believe, this is in the Zohar, that the Messiah will only come when those people are shrouded in darkness. In fact, I can show you the exact quote in the book here. This is actually the Sanhedrin, not the Zohar, excuse me, the Sanhedrin 99a. This is from the Talmud. And it says that these people, the heretics, so the Goyim, the non-Jews, or the people that fight back against the Jews, will be enshrouded in darkness, and that's when the Messiah will come. You can see it right here, at least what some of the rabbis believe. So in order to create the conditions for the Messiah to arrive, this is both what the Zohar and the Talmud and what the rabbis believe today. We can play the clips of them, that they have to create conditions in which all the non-Jews are corrupted. If they weren't before, they are by default corrupt because they're not Jews and they're not chosen, but they need to be corrupted. They need to be defiled. This is why the Talmud speaks about defiling women and speaks about Mary in a whorish way. They say that she was licentious with a carpenter. That's in Talmud. This is why they run OnlyFans and Tinder and Bumble and hookup culture, and a rabbi runs Pornhub, and why Al Goldstein is the founder of modern contemporary hardcore pornography, and so on and so forth. It's the same thing that happened in Weimar Germany, because you have to enshroud the non-Jew in darkness. Once you do that, the Messiah will arrive, or it happens simultaneously. And of course, when the Messiah arrives, all the wicked people will be wiped from the earth. So yeah, you might not think that you're Anakim, and you're really not Anakim, but the rabbis apply that term to anybody who might be prideful enough to say, I don't like what you're doing in Gaza. Suddenly you become Anakim, and when the Messiah comes, you get wiped off the earth. So really, rabbinical Judaism especially is a wicked death cult in which they intend to murder billions of people. There's one rabbi who's close to Netanyahu who says that about 6 billion people on this planet need to die, if for no other reason than they're idol worshipers.
Well, don't they reference they want 27,000 slaves each?
I don't know about 27,000 slaves, but I can tell you that if you read the Talmud, it does reference slaves. It does explicitly say that when the Messiah comes, that the people that are not Jews, they will be enslaved by the Jewish people. That's Eruvin 43b. And this is an interesting statement, because we can listen to the rabbis again who talk about how, for example, countries like China would be spared by God, even though those countries are not really Christian. I mean, there are Christians in China, but they're not really Christian. They're like an atheistic state, at least from the outside looking in. They have a lot of Buddhism and whatnot there, but they're atheistic, or at least they're idol worshipers, according to the rabbis. So China, which is like a non-godly country, the rabbis say, will be saved by God and given power only to destroy the United States and the Western world. This is what the rabbis actually say. One of the top rabbis in Israel actually says this and believes. His name's Rabbi Glasser, says this. So then he's admitting that their God is not the God of good and decency, because this God is going to let some atheistic nation, at least how they paint it, destroy the Christian nations because of Rome and because of the destruction of the temple, Second Temple in 70 AD. And then those Chinese people that will be used to destroy the Western nations, those Chinese people, according to Rabbi Glasser, they essentially, in this regard, they become the slaves. They become the slaves of the Jews, and then they also are exterminated in the end, just like Mao killed all the people who let them gain power.
Well, and that's what's kind of funny when you like start looking at like communism, which one it will kind of, I guess, like stumble into with the somewhat of what the Weimar Republic was like, but what was happening during before the Soviet Union took power and the Bolsheviks, and how they reference certain people as useful idiots, and then they would essentially exterminate them. So they use like college kids, people that are like easy to manipulate. You see this in America, you see this in Canada. There is like a communist party in Halifax of all these kids that can barely raise a fist. But they think that they're gonna they want a violent revolution. There was like big communist marches with thousands of communists that are being obviously paid by somebody to make all these banners and signs in Canada. And there's like thousands of them marching through Montreal and Toronto and across Canada not that long ago, like 2 years ago. So they're being funded quite well, but it is a lot of weak people. And a lot of times when you criticize communism, as I've done online, you have people come out and they call you like an incel, even though they're probably an incel and they've never like touched a woman. But you see the same thing where they have like a pride flag, or they have in their bio, where it kind of goes hand in hand, and they don't even realize the manipulation tactic, because this kind of does reference back to the Weimar Germany, but like how it's like transgenderism, feminism, communism, it all goes back to Judaism. And that's not like, that's objective reality and fact.
It's actually in the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's in the Encyclopedia Judaica that socialism was not invented by the Jewish people, but socialism was embraced by the Jewish people. Communism was embraced by the Jewish people because it's a very similar ideology. We get to rule, we get possession of everything, and you don't. So we're better than you. We are the leaders. We are the masterminds. We are the masters of the universe, and you get to be the servants that work in the fields. That's essentially, in a nutshell, what the Encyclopedia Judaica says.
They say it like even Gene Simmons from Kiss, and when he used to do his live show, or what, not the live show, but the reality show, you hear, it's so funny because they left it in. It's like his car breaks down, or so he needs his car fixed or something like that. And someone who says, oh, he should fix it, or whatever, and he's like, that's work for the Goyim. And he literally says it on the show.
I bet he does. I have no doubt about that.
And Epstein references this too. He says similar lines of like, that's the work for the Goyim.
Here's an example from the book on that note. I'll show you at the end of this one chapter I have in the book here. This is a direct statement from the Encyclopedia Judaica. You can read here on the screen, pause the show, and you can read about, this is a very small little snippet. I have the whole page in the book. But this is a reference to the socialism, the origin of socialism.
And you think that they engineered the French Revolution, right? Because it seems as a lot of revolutions were engineered in the background by these people. There's even theories about like the Civil War, stuff like that, where there were, people exchanging money and funds to start wars, obviously. And I've started researching stuff into like the Civil War, but even it just seems like they create the revolutions, because then it causes chaos, and then the power structure fails, and then they get to swoop in and take over. At least it seems like that's what happens.
Well, you see that in the case of Napoleon, the Battle of Waterloo. This has been a very famous conspiracy for a very long time. And the idea that the Rothschilds, or the very wealthy bankers, went in and bought up all of the businesses. They bought up all of the stocks under the false premise that Napoleon had actually won the battle when he'd lost it. So the stock market essentially collapsed. So that is essentially, I mean, you're watching that happen in real time every time the president tweets something about Iran and how things are really, really, really great on the weekend. The weekends for the or they're really bad on the weekend for the market. Then by Monday, everything's horrible and we're gonna kill everybody again. It just kind of goes back and forth. Like there's a lot of insider trading, et cetera. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah, Trump, like the crypto Trump, like it's crazy. It's tons of money that they essentially.
It's Howard Lutnick behind it, who's a literal 1930s propaganda poster. But if you look at this socialism, Encyclopedia Judaica socialism section, this is just a tiny little snippet of it. It'll openly say here, for a variety of reasons, Jews were attracted to socialism as it developed in Western Europe. Some regarded it as the building of a just society based on the teachings of the Bible and the prophets, while others were attracted by its revolutionary nature. Some Jews saw socialism as a reply to anti-Semitism. There were also Jews who saw it in a way of getting rid of their Jewish heritage and serving the brotherhood of man, which is often a term or a phrase that is used to describe what people might call Luciferianism or Satanism, the brotherhood of man. Some might call it the brotherhood of the serpent, but this is actually the Encyclopedia Judaica admitting that a lot of Jews are not Jews. They embrace socialism and communism by extension as their religion, and in that they reject God. So that it becomes confusing, because if we're talking about the Talmud again, and we can definitely move on to other subjects after this, but we'll go back to those quotes just to give you a general idea of the eschatological beliefs. If the Sanhedrin 99a says, he will come when the darkness will enshroud these people, that's the Messiah, and those are the heretics, respectively. And Yervin 43b says, for once the Messiah comes, all the nations will be subservient to the Jewish people. And you read in the Sanhedrin, if a Jew murders a Gentile, he's exempt. And the Sanhedrin 57a, same exact section, it is permitted for a Jew to rob a Gentile. You have all admissions here that Gentiles are not considered the same. Gentiles are not held to the same standards. Gentiles, or rather they're held to standards and the Jews are not. You could look at it that way. They even say that the Torah is off limits to the Gentiles, which means if you possess it, the Talmud actually authorizes your execution for reading the Bible, for the record. So it's kind of ironic. They say,
yeah, I've heard that they say they'll execute you.
Read Genesis, bless those who bless Israel. But in the Talmud, the rabbis say that if you possess Genesis, then it is grounds for your death.
Is it? And I've heard, isn't it true that during the communist takeover that anti-Semitism, whatever that is, because they're not Semitic or what, wasn't it punishable by death?
What was punishable by death during the
anti-Semitism during like the Bolshevik Revolution?
Well, that was the first thing. That was the first law that was passed after the revolution, was to prevent people from criticizing Jews. Now, they weren't entirely behind the revolution. This is how people often skirt the issue. They say, well, the Jews they weren't all Jews. Sure, but a significant portion were. And again, going back to that socialism quote, the Encyclopedia Judaica openly admits that. And in giving up their Judaism and embracing socialism, that's where we can actually go back to your question about the Tower of Babel. Because here, for example, and if you don't have the video on right now, you're listening to the audio only, you can type in Tower of Babel Kircher, who was, I believe was he Rosicrucian? I can't recall. He was an author. He was an artist, Renaissance guy. Athanasius Kircher, Tower of Babel. You get a pretty good idea of what he says the Tower of Babel looked like. That's his depiction. It's a very famous depiction. But here, this other image that you see on your screen, you see what is referred to as the Palace of the Soviets. And if you look at that image in comparison with Kircher, it's very similar, because it's not an opinion. The Soviets literally destroyed the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in order to build the Palace of the Soviets, which they never completed. But they built the Palace of the Soviets that looks like the Tower of Babel on top of the Cathedral of Christ.
Dude, they did it at the Oscars. They literally had a representation of the Tower of Babel as the background in the Oscars.
I did not see that, but I would not be surprised by this.
Yeah, it's crazy. My co-host that's from Ireland, he pointed out and brought up images, and you can clearly see that it's made out of gold, and you can see it resembles the Tower of Babel like exactly. And they also have like weird Anunnaki like statues and stuff like that, and like depictions in Hollywood that are like really weird, and it's just like Sumerian connections, and kind of like that's why people bring up the Babylon connection too. But it is weird. They showed the Tower of Babel like during an Oscars, like maybe like 5-6 years ago.
I wouldn't doubt that, considering what else I've seen and what I've dug up accidentally a lot of the time. I would say that in order to understand the context of what we're discussing, it's probably important to address something, what might seem unrelated, and that is all the different arguments and claims against what I'm saying, all the fallacies and all the gaslighting. Like, well, that's not what all the rabbis believe, or that's not what all the Jews believe, which we did address that. Or, well, sure, it might say that, but they don't really believe that. All of those kinds of arguments. So the reason that I started talking on my show a lot about Islam, for those of you who don't know my show, I talk quite a bit about Islam. I'm not a Muslim, but I talk quite a bit about Islam, because when I heard those arguments, I thought, okay, that's interesting. If that's your argument, I'm going to apply that to the Muslim propaganda. So if you're going to show me a grainy video of a so-called Muslim leader, well, I'm going to show you a video, it's in high definition, of a rabbi saying something that comes directly out of their book. Whereas the Muslim leader is quoting something that doesn't actually come from the hadiths or the Quran. I checked, but the rabbi is quoting something that comes from their holy books. Then I start thinking a lot of this Muslim stuff clearly is just manufactured propaganda. So if that's not what all the Jews believe, that's not what all the Muslims believe then. If it says so-and-so in the Talmud, and that's just out of context, okay, well then what you're quoting in the Quran is out of context. And what I ended up discovering is that it's a lot more than just tongue-in-cheek. Virtually everything they've claimed about the Muslims, from beating women, for example, or hating dogs, is not just out of context. It seems to be an entirely manufactured projection of what the Jews themselves teach and believe. For example, if you read the Talmud, or if you look at the ways in which from Pornhub to OnlyFans, these companies and these platforms essentially abuse women, it's actually the Jewish religion that teaches that non-Jewish women are cattle. As a matter of fact, it says in the Talmud that non-Jewish women engage in bestiality. You might say,
well, I've read those. Yeah.
It's wildly printed in the text. It's there. You're right. It's there. But if you were to read those and then you were to compare them to the Quran, people are referencing, usually without their knowledge, they're referencing, I believe it's An-Nisa 434 of the Quran. And it does not say to beat women. In fact, it says the opposite. In fact, if you read the hadiths, Muhammad says never strike a woman, especially a Muslim woman. Never strike a woman, ever, under any circumstance. It does say that you can, on the third offense of a woman basically breaking the marriage contract, that you can strike a woman, but the Muslim scholars say that that term does not mean that you beat them. And if you look at that kind of an idea anywhere else in the world, you can find Native American tribes. In fact, there was a European king and a court that authorized the striking of women in a symbolic way to make them at home follow what their husbands tell them to do. So it's not an exclusive thing to Islam. So it's not defending Islam. It's just like, the Muslims don't run Pornhub. The Muslims don't run OnlyFans. The Muslims don't run Bumble and Tinder. The Muslims don't run feminism. The Muslims don't run any of these things that have destroyed families and men and women. It's destroyed.
Yeah, they're not running pride parades or like didn't they have like some pride event in Israel in like the by the Dead Sea or something like that, like, which is so bizarre. And it'd be interesting.
Sodom and Gomorrah was.
Like what? What do you think about that?
I think that they are, for all intents and purposes, the synagogue of Satan. I think that they are the wickedest death cult that has ever existed on this planet. And I think they've projected their death cultiness onto every culture they've interacted with. And that's why we see every culture that's not, quote, Christian or has some Jewish connection as being evil and satanic. I mean, I've got Christian listeners that think that the Japanese are Satanists because they don't have Christianity over here. It's like, what are you talking about? It's very stupid.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting that, because you always hear these references to like Karl Marx, who believed he was possessed by like demons and stuff. And he said like, accuse your enemy of everything you're doing. And it is a good shield if that is correct. Right. So that's a good shield to like, and there is, the rabbis, and this is like, and I, just to clarify for legal reasons and stuff like that, this is not. I'm not saying that I believe in everything that Ryan is claiming. We're just having an objective conversation about historical events and things that have happened and things that are happening. But if you see this too, with like, there is rabbis speaking about Islam is the broom of Israel. It will wipe off like Europe off the face of this map. So it's like, it seems as if they're projecting their own beliefs and behaviors onto others in the same way that, in 9/11, right? They said it was, first it was the Iraqis, then it was the Afghanis. Like they just kept scapegoating other people, and they all were regional enemies of Israel. It's just too convenient. And then you have Wesley Clark being like, we have to take out 7 countries in 5 years. It didn't take that long. And Iran was conveniently the last one on the list. So,
well, I think North Korea is on that list, but Iran's definitely probably the biggest one. And so if you were to, I want to mention this because I think this it definitely connects to the temple story that we should probably discuss. And then we can get more into the Weimar Republic if that's good.
Yeah, let's do that.
So, I said from women to dogs. This is a recent one that I've seen because of Alex Jones and Sneeko and all these people that I don't really trust. They said
I don't really trust Sneeko either, and he's dressing like Malcolm X, and he looks stupid.
He does look stupid. I don't trust. I don't trust any of these people. I don't care what's on. So they said that this is important. This might sound silly, but this is actually really important. So they said that the Muslims don't like dogs, and if you don't like dogs, you shouldn't be trusted, and so on and so forth. So if you actually read the Quran, or if you read more so the hadiths, it's not what they teach. They actually teach that the only verse that you can extrapolate and try to misinterpret it as meaning that they hate dogs is that if a dog licks a container, like a spoon or a vessel, you should wash it 7 times. I'm like, I don't know who has a dog and wants to eat out of their dog's bowl. That kind of sounds gross to me. You don't have to hate dogs. I feel like cleanliness is a good thing.
Like we all would do that. But there is people that make out with their dogs. So
I think that's gross. That's my view. But see, there's a lot to discuss here. This is why my book is so big that it's basically 2 books in one. So number one, if you read the Talmud, and if you read the Jewish traditions, they believe, and if you read the Bible, as a matter of fact, Numbers 28:3, they believe in animal sacrifice. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of the temple. It's animal sacrifice. Lots of animals.
Well, that's what because do you believe in the regards of like that maybe if Jesus did preemptively make a whip and then whipped them out of the synagogue and stuff like that? Because there was references not only to the money changers and that they were like using usury, but also that there was like blood flowing throughout the and they were sacrificing. Maybe not like you could go on the human aspect and get like really conspiracy with it, but also animals. And you made a reference on the one show you're on how like a kid could be referenced as a goat.
That is the old term for a goat. Yes. So if you're saying sacrifice a kid, that doesn't mean a child. It means a young goat. That's literally what it means, a young goat. But they did sacrifice mostly lambs, and they would do it every single day. So Judaism is a religion of animal sacrifice, which again is wild that Christians apparently don't recognize that the building of the third temple would undo, at least as far as the Jews were concerned, it would undo the sacrifice of Jesus, because the temple was where they would sacrifice all the animals every day. But if you read the hadiths of Muhammad, he says, do not abuse women, do not kill women. Actually, in the book of Jihad, do not kill women, do not kill children, do not kill the crippled, do not harm these people. And it also says that dogs are companions, and they're honored companions. So like, again, I'm not a Muslim, but like, why would people lie about that when it's so easy to verify that it's not true? And then the only conclusion I can come to is, well, that's because what they're accusing the Muslims of is what they do. And then if you go read the Old Testament, they're the ones that are sacrificing the animals every single day in the temple.
Yeah,
They're
and what's
the
that?
ones
What's that
that are
chicken
eating the chicken.
capora? What's that called when they do they swing the chicken over? It's
Oh, the Yom,
crazy.
yeah, that's right here in my book, the Yom Kippur, the
Yom
korbanot. Korbanot.
That's it.
Now, the Muslims have korbani, which is essentially the exact same thing. They only practice it once a year. Not all Jews practice the beating of the chicken.
It's it's a strange thing. Like, I'm not religious at all. Like, and I always thought it was strange when Christians would drink the metaphorical blood of Christ and eat his body, right? Because that's like, it is like
vampirism and cannibalism.
yeah, it's a culty, like, it's weird, right? It's like a symbolic blatant drinking of blood. But that is crazy. And like, there's like obviously the more rabbinic Jews that are in like New York and stuff. I've heard that, I've seen videos where they'll ship like tons of chickens to areas and it's just like a bloodbath. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, you're like, what are you doing over there?
Yep. And they're not the only ones that do it. What's the other, I mean, and they do this in voodoo, which is like a mix of Caribbean and it's actually basically Catholicism mixed with folk religion. And then there's Santeria, where they sacrifice like another Afro-Caribbean religion. It's kind of similar to voodoo, I guess. Relatively recent development of a religion in the 19th century. So Santeria and voodoo, they also sacrifice animals. It's not unique.
Hades seems scary. So
yeah, even the ancient Chinese used to sacrifice animals to a god named Shangdi, who is important to mention because Shangdi predates the Jewish monotheistic god, and Shangdi was a god, a supreme god like Brahman in the Hindu tradition. And they would sacrifice animals, and reportedly, if you read the myths, I say reportedly because I don't know who told the original story, but in the myths, Shangdi is not only like the primary god, Shangdi is also responsible for sending divine emanations, which is like it means, creation and evolution and whatnot coming down from a central source. It's a bunch of different things, but it can be interpreted as sending his offspring. So sending his child, the Chinese, which is another universal concept that is in almost it's on every continent for sure. It's in almost every single culture. So that's not unique to Christians. Anyway, the point is, if you were to look at the temple history, it was a temple of human and animal sacrifice. We say human too, because we know that in the Old Testament, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. And considering what was Rome believed in order. And even though the Roman soldiers were very timid about entering the temple in 70 AD, and they eventually did enter the temple and do battle with the remaining Jews that were there, I've always suspected that one of the reasons why we're told that the Romans did all these horrible things, and it's not that they didn't, some of the emperors were beyond insane, but I think a lot of it was probably a projection of what the Jewish community was doing. And I started to think, well, we have this Old Testament story about Isaac, and the Romans were really suspicious about that temple. I wouldn't be surprised if they were sacrificing more than just animals in that temple. I wouldn't be surprised if they were sacrificing non-Jews from the community. And that's probably one of the I don't have any evidence to back that up. What I'm simply saying is, based on the context of everything else that we're saying.
But Simon Latrent or whatever and stuff, there's stories.
That's another lie. We probably don't have time to talk about it, but I have an appendix in the book on that. And the first story I read about that was from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and they said that the body of that little boy was found in a river by a bunch of Jews walking by, and they reported it and then got arrested. That's not the story. The original story was that the body was found in the cellar of one of the Jewish homes. So they lied about where the body was found. I don't know why you would lie about where the body is found unless you put the body there, unless you killed the person. I don't know why you would have any motivation to lie about that. Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of that type of a thing happening. In my opinion, I think we should talk about the temple and then the Weimar Republic.
Yeah, for sure. I gotta ask one question while I have you here anyway. What Why do the Hindus worship like poo and stuff, like cow poo and pee, and there's theories that like Indo-Aryans like influenced India, and then it's a humiliation ritual. I don't know if you've ever, because I feel like you read a lot of stuff, so I was just curious of like what you think about some of those weird cultural practices that are done in India, like they light their wives on fire if the husband dies. Like, have you ever looked into like why they worship? Like in that regard, it seems very strange to us in Canada.
Well, I don't think that that's actually accurate. I think that it's largely mythological. Like they don't worship it. It's just like with the Talmud, just like with the Zohar or the Bible itself or the Quran or the Hadiths. It's misinterpretation. Like cows are sacred, and they were sacred in Egypt too. Cows are sacred. So any part of the cow thus becomes sacred.
Even
that,
poo.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that Hindus worship poo. A lot of that stuff is either people that are doing stupid, silly things, or a lot of it's actually AI videos now. But also historically, I mean, if you remember Ace Ventura with the bat poo, guano. It's like guano.
Yeah,
it's a plant fertilizer. So poo is actually pretty necessary to grow crops. So if the cow is sacred and the cow gives you poop and you collect the poop and you use it to fertilize the crops, then it's like the crops come from God. So maybe it's a remnant of agricultural practices.
They do have that poo festival. Tyler Oliveira went there. It's like, and so there is a faction of like some of these, like it's just strange to me. I just wanted to ask you if you knew anything about it, but
yeah, it's called Gorhaba, I think.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
It's a single village in India. But yeah, those are the kinds of things that it's one group, like one time a year, one little segment of billions of people, and then we assume that everybody practices that, which is
why are Jews obsessed with poo too? Because they like do poo paintings and stuff.
I don't know about the poo paintings, but I can tell you that if we I can show you this too, and then we can talk about some related details. If you were to go into, this is some really wild stuff. If you go read, I have this in my new book. If you go read the journal of, let me pull it up and show you. You go read the journal of General Patton. It says
I've heard similar things that he said.
It's some wild stuff, and Truman even referred to it too. But anyway, here's the journal of. These are the actual entry pages from the Library of Congress. These are the pages of the journal. I'll read you a quote from this. This is after World War II. This is when Jewish communities are being housed in like makeshift synagogues and communities and et cetera. So Patton and General Eisenhower go to look at one of these Jewish camps, and it's established in a German hospital. This is September of 1945. It says this, quote, "The buildings were therefore in a good state of repair when the Jews arrived, but were in a bad state of repair when we arrived." This is General Patton, okay? This isn't Captain Crunch. This is like the most famous general outside of Washington in American history, probably. Because the Jewish displaced persons, or at least the majority of them, have no sense of human relationships. They decline when practicable to use latrines, preferring to relieve themselves on the floor. And it's interesting that he says that, among other things, that they were just generally filthy and disgusting, and he had to take a literal shower after that. But if you go back and you look at some of the documents from the labor camp Auschwitz, which was a part of 44 subgroups of other camps that were a part of the singular Auschwitz camp, one of the things that we've heard about is that the Germans were really nasty to these prisoners. They made them do things like stand, or they made them go in a cell and just stand there all night. Well, actually, we have records of that. They did make them stand all night. But the reason... well, here's why. If you look at this and you translate the German, one of these prisoners, it doesn't even matter that they're Jewish, was meant to stand in a cell upright because they were using the back of the hut as a latrine. The exact same thing that Patton observed after the war. And these are things that are documented, not fairy tale fictions. So there is something to what you just said. I don't know if they worship it, but maybe it's, if cleanliness is next to godliness, and they reject God in Judaism, then filthiness is next to whatever they worship, is the only conclusion.
Well, I just want it to be, because we can get into the Tower of Babel stuff and then into the Weimar, because we can go through it and I can show a lot of images of kind of what was going on at that time period. But like, do you think that there's any relation to like as we kind of discussed with this infiltration of religion of the Sabbatean, like Frankists, of like how it's inversion, because it's like whatever, it's just in the studies that I've looked into, some of the books I've read, it's this idea that like they need to invert or subvert everything and essentially invert natural reality, and like, you know, men can be women, all these kind of things, but also like doing practices like, with Jacob Frank being connected to some of the stuff, we can kind of get into that, but of like kind of where it's, you have to do immoral behavior to go against God. So you have to like to do orgies or to sleep with your sister or your buddy's wife, or it's just total corruption of the soul. So it's almost like to invoke God.
Yes. So there's a couple of pieces of information here that your audience will need to know. Number one, referring back to the Talmud that we looked at earlier, and even the Zohar, they talk about enshrouding people in darkness and corrupting them, or making sure that people are punished for their natural corruptions in order for the Messiah to come. So in order to create the conditions in which their Savior arrives, they have to do these kinds of things to other people and also to themselves. The second thing is, in doing them to themselves, they are rejecting, or doing them to other people, they are rejecting the general Christian conception of God, you know, goodliness and decency and, you know, brotherhood, etc. And they are replacing it with the exact opposite. This is why I believe Yuval Harari, Sam Altman, and a bunch of other Herzliya, Tel Aviv, Silicon Valley billionaire tech types are usually homosexual Jews, because they reject creation. As a matter of fact, Sam Altman, whose name is Shamael, altar man, the altar,
which is crazy. That's crazy,
wild.
Dude.
It's wild.
Well, it's like Goldstein, like, you know what I mean? It's just, you know.
It's in the name. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. Sam Altman and his husband are actually investing in genetically modified babies. So the idea is that, and it's not a Jewish thing per se. I think Peter Thiel's not Jewish, and he believes the same thing. He's obsessed with the Antichrist. It's the idea that God messed up. God messed up. God screwed up. They can fix it. God, the God that you worship is not the right God. It's a false God, and everything that God tells you to do is wrong. So if you just do the opposite, then the Messiah comes. And by the way, the Sanhedrin, that's the Jewish council. They literally just petitioned heaven. This is their official statement. They petitioned heaven to do a lot of the things that we just talked about tonight. They petitioned heaven to eliminate the enemies of Jews and Israel and Zionists, which means everybody. They petitioned heaven to bring about the Messiah, and they petitioned heaven to help them build the third temple. They believe that if they do it on an earthly plane, that the heavenly courts, the heavenly Sanhedrin, if you will then bless them here on this earth. So they're literally advocating for mass genocide of the entire global population, the erection of a temple for which they will insert for Christians, the Antichrist, and the creation of the oldest conspiracy that I can remember in my lifetime learning about, the New World Order. That is not a German idea. It's not a German idea. That's a Jewish idea. Everything they claimed about the Germans being they wanted to take over the world, and they did not think that other people who were not German were human. No, actually, the Jews don't think that people who are not Jews are human, and the Jews want to take over the world. Clearly, from their writings, it's not my opinion. This is the only conclusion I can come to, and until someone can give me an explanation of what these things mean otherwise, this is the only conclusion that I can come to.
Well, it's in their own right. Do you believe that Adolf, like that he had connections, like his grandfather was like a Rothschild? Because I have an episode written out we're going to eventually maybe cover on Patreon or whatever of discussing this idea, because I know there's people out there that like want to flip the script and they want to like worship Adolf in some regard now, because everything is which I don't think that's I don't know what phrase I want to use. I don't think that's necessary, but like looking at history objectively and understanding there's nuances to what happened is one thing. But also you would have to be kind of naive to think that these people weren't like someone didn't get to them. You know, when we have this hierarchy of things that were happening and some of the money that was being funded. So like before we get into, or maybe we should do that later, but when we get into Weimar Republic and stuff like that, like, do you believe that he was like a family member to like the Rothschilds or something?
I don't know. I discussed it. As you can see, I discussed it in the book. That is an official news publication that you see. Hitler's grandfather was a Jew. I think it was a British dossier that had been declassified. Honestly, to me, that's not really the central issue in my book or in my my readings. So I don't really know one way or the other. I do know that what you said is true for me. I don't like quote worship Hitler. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. I don't worship Hitler any more than I worship anybody else. I don't worship anybody.
Yes.
So I think it's really silly, and I think a lot of that is actually run by the pro-Israel movement, just like the BDS movement is run by the Democrat Socialists of New York. They're the ones that they're run by. I mean, at the top, they're mostly Jews. One of the top guys is Gulden. He's a Jewish guy who worked with Mamdani, who's not a real radical Muslim. But they came up with the BDS movement. I mean, Hitler even writes in his book that all the anti-Jewish movements, a lot of them are actually run by the Jews themselves. So it creates
because a lot of people are just listening to his speeches now because we have the it's available with AI, and then people are just kind of questioning it. That's why I've always said that there's a chance he could be controlled opposition or whatever. And like, it's almost to venerate him as a hero now. And you see this a lot online. And I just feel like people have to ask a little more questions than watching a 2-minute video that they saw on Instagram or something. Cause you see that a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm always like, come on guys, you got like, I really try to be objective and look at both sides of what's going on. Because there is, documented proof or suspicion that he had connections, and then it's like they always say that they fund both sides also, so it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
Yes, and whether or not Hitler was or not, it to me that's irrelevant to, at least it's relevant to my new book. The idea that I don't know, the idea that it's like a fun, or it's like a cool thing to quote worship Hitler. I hear people arguing that. And they'll argue that it's not a good thing to do that because Hitler was just a bad guy, and they use that to reinforce the same narrative. I don't say that because I'm trying to reinforce the narrative. I'm saying that because like I don't back or support movements or people. I don't support political parties. I don't support historical political parties or figures. I find all that strange. I think it's about as strange as a bunch of people, at least we get this in the US, that put on khaki pants and all the same shirts and boots and go out and march and claim to be quote Nazis when they're clearly feds that went to a Burlington coat factory. So I think that a lot of that is absolutely run by organizations, or run by the intelligence community, or run by the maybe the FBI or something.
Well, carry on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think the reason that people jump to that conclusion is it's a really simple reason. It's because they realized, oh, we've been lied to. So yes. I guess by default, Hitler must be a good guy, and that's not the case.
Well, and it is almost just like where I've heard of like they almost in their prophecies and their writings that they need the world to hate them. So if you're manufacturing this hatred because you believe that it's going to invoke your God, because it's in your scripture that when the world hates you, your Moshiach or whatever comes back. That's why I'm like, you got to kind of like question of why they're allowing certain information to come out, but then I also think, even with the Epstein stuff, and it's kind of leads towards the Weimar Republic stuff too, is just like that they almost tell you what they're doing out in the open. And it's almost, I don't know if it's a karmactic rule or what, but it just seems kind of strange that they'll give you information. And the fact that like, we know that there's, child trafficking and like at least blackmail operations that are happening within government officials, within our, and within bureaucracy in Hollywood, and then everyone is still just paying taxes to these people. It's crazy.
Most of the anti-establishment movements are run by the establishment. It's the same. It was that way in China. It is that way in China. That was that way in the Soviet Union. I've talked about the 100 Flowers campaign or Operation Trust. I think that's what MAGA was in the United States. Get people that are opposed to the system, that want to drain the swamp, that want to take down the government, and then you put them in a database and a catalog, and you take care of them. If you're the Soviet Union, you just disappear people. If you're China, you disappear people. If you're the United States, then you make those people look really dumb through the media, and then nobody will ever question the government again. Nobody will, out of fear of being labeled one of those crazy January 6ers or being labeled a
Nick Fuentes. Yeah. That guy's definitely a gay fed or something.
That's a great way to describe him. He's definitely a gay furry fed. But anyway, yes, of all the things we've discussed tonight, it sort of builds to the Weimar Republic historically and how that relates to the United States. And I want to say one thing really quick, and then I'll let you take us into the Weimar Republic and wherever you want to go with it, just ask questions or whatever. I think it's important to note, though, that this whole thing that we see today happening with those 7 countries, with Iran, and with we got to defend Israel and whatnot. A lot of that is based, as the rabbis say, and as Netanyahu himself has alluded to, is based on the destruction of the Second Temple. But if you go and read the history of the Second Temple, it wasn't actually the Romans that destroyed it, at least in the way that they describe this historically. Here in my book, you can see copies of the Jewish Encyclopedia. You can see copies of the writings of in this case, a Roman/Greek historian. You can see statements from Flavius Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. Dion Cassius is the Roman historian. He's a Greek. He was a senator, but he was from Greece, or he was Greek. And what it actually describes, just one little example here. Dion Cassius, who's the historian, he writes that the Jews set fire to some of the buildings near the temple, hoping to check the progress of the Romans. They go on to say, in this way, they not only damaged the wall, so that's the holy wall around the temple, but at the same time unintentionally burned down the barrier around the sacred precinct. Okay, so then it goes on to say the Romans, when they didn't immediately rush into the temple because they held it to be either sacred or they were superstitious about it. And then it goes on to say that when they got into the temple, the people in the temple, these were the Jewish, I'm assuming maybe some rabbis, but they were Jews in the temple that were defending it. They met death willingly, some throwing themselves on the swords of the Romans, some slaying one another, others taking their own lives, and still others leaping into the flames. If you go and you read, one last thing here, if you go and you read the Encyclopedia of Judaica, or the Jewish Encyclopedia, it'll say things like this: accounts of Titus, he's the Roman general who's blamed for the fire, in rabbinical literature are purely legendary. Their utter unreliability. The medieval Jews invented numerous legends concerning Titus. In other words, it appears that the Jews might have literally or accidentally burned their own temple, even though it does say that it was a random Roman that lit the temple on fire. But they made up all these stories about the Roman general Titus, and this is who they still go back to today and saying this is why we need these wars. Because
like how they spray swastikas on their own synagogue.
Ah, yes, my friend. That's exactly what it appears to have happened. And the same thing goes.
There's numerous stories of this, like well documented.
This is their encyclopedia saying that they invented the stories of Titus. So, I mean, I don't know how much more official you can get. If you disagree with that, you're an anti-Semite, right? Here's the actual page. And it goes on to say a lot more than just that, but it appears that at the very least, the burning of that second temple was an accident. It likely, I would say, based on the Jews setting fires around the temple, it probably was their own fault. But if you go back to the first temple, it's pretty much the same thing. Nebuchadnezzar goes into Jerusalem. He sieges the city after the revolt, and he exiles a lot of the Jewish leadership to Babylon. Then they revolt again, and the king that he planted in Babylon, he decides to also rebel. So they go and exile the Jewish leaders again, not the common people, the leadership, the aristocracy. And Nebuchadnezzar says, look, these people are just, you can't deal with them. So we don't have any choice but to burn down, destroy their temple, because that's the center of the conspiracy. And if you read, you can read this in encyclopedias, and you can read this in the Bible. The entire temple itself is some sacred, holy thing. The bronze, the gold, everything in that temple was just stolen in acts of genocide by the king, by David. Everything that was built and put in that temple was literally stolen, with few exceptions. There are a couple donatives to the Jews for this temple. Most of it is stolen from acts of barbarity and genocide against anybody who was considered an enemy or anybody who had things they wanted.
And
so
they
just
act like they got stolen. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Projection.
That is so critically important that I think we needed to pause to note that. But if you want to move on to Weimar, I think
let's get. So we covered this in a very my buddy that we used to do the show with, and we used to sit in the basement, and it started off us getting drunk and talking about conspiracies. And now here we are, 8 years later. And when he was down from out east or whatever, I was like, I got a topic we can cover, and he didn't know anything about it. And we covered the Weimar Republic in a very comedic way, just because it's so absurd. How we of what was going on there, and child prostitution, transgender ideologies, and a lot of people don't know where this came from. So I kind of wanted we could break it down a bit. I know a fair amount about it, but I think it would be interesting in your perspective historically of kind of what was taking place then, and what kind of led up to the takeover by the National Socialists. And how that kind of went down. But even obviously, if you could probably describe it better, but obviously after World War I, Germany is destroyed essentially. Their economy is nothing. It's pretty much gone. And then so it was Antifa, right? That's so crazy, dude.
Yeah.
I'll let you get into it, because obviously, and there was you would need billions of marks to buy stuff. Everything was so expensive. They were burning money for warmth essentially, because it meant nothing.
So yes, after the Treaty of Versailles and after World War I, German economics were basically void. There was no economic system. It was basically rampant inflation, homelessness, poverty. People didn't have money to buy food, etc. So the economic system was completely obliterated.
Sound familiar, everybody?
Sound familiar. A lot of that came from the Germans being blamed on top of that for World War I, which I'm sure there were some people at the time who said, this is maybe not a good idea to just burden these people with all the guilt. And because Hitler, even, he says that is the reason why the Nazi Party is deciding to make movements outside of what we consider Germany. That's why they went into Poland, and that's a very complicated history too, because it's in newspapers that there was a very explicit reason why they went into Poland. But they went into Poland because there were Germans who were being greatly affected by what was happening there. It's kind of like with Putin and the Donbass region in Ukraine. It's actually a very, very similar type of a situation. Anyway, the point is, though, if you were to look at why Hitler and why the German people as a whole believed what they believed, it is simply a matter of the historical record, contrary to popular belief, that there was no reason whatsoever, that it was the Treaty of Versailles, it was the economic hardships, and it was the Jewish influence. Now, this is where things get somewhat complicated, because when you say Jewish influence, people think, oh, just the Jews were running society. And well, yeah, in a way, if you look at the movie theaters, if you look at the theaters, if you look at the businesses, if you look at healthcare, if you look at all this stuff, that was every segment, every sector of society, they were disproportionately controlled by Jews. But the main issue is communism. Communism was very big and very popular in the 1920s in Germany. And there was actually an attempted communist uprising after World War I. And the German soldiers who had survived World War I and came home, I believe they called them the Freikorps, the Freedom Corps, They had to physically fight against the Bolshevik-style revolution that attempted to exploit the German economic hardship to take over the government. And the Germans put those revolutionaries down, and so they reformed into what we call Antifa. And Antifa, you can see on your screen, the image on the right, the image that most of you know is the black and red anti-fascist action, is not a modern movement. If you flip the flag the other direction and you make the whole thing red, it literally is a flag from, or a symbol from, the 1920s and 30s. It was the paramilitary wing of the Communist Party, the Anti-Fascistische Aktion. And they held rallies. There's photographs of them. Put them on the screen. They held rallies in the 1930s. In fact, at least a year before Hitler even came to power, they were holding these rallies in Germany. These are official images. Here's another one. This is an image of the Buchenwald concentration camp. And this is where a bunch of Antifa members go protest outside the camp. You may have seen this in Portland. You know, they go protest outside prisons when people are arrested for firebombing federal buildings or for spraying pepper spray into the eyes of moms and dads taking their children, you know, downtown for something.
We have them in Canada. They're everywhere. And they're being funded clearly. They're very, it seems they're very weak and subversive people that are very easy to manipulate and control. And even to the point where they will cut off their dicks thinking that, you know, it's going to affirm them of their gender. And they're like out of their mind. A lot of like, we had a shooting, which is very rare in Canada. And it was essentially a mentally ill transgender kid. God knows if there's any deeper conspiracies to that, but they're the same people that are pushing these left-wing, far left-wing ideologies. And Antifa was essentially, it was a Jewish anti-Nazi, like a militia, right? Essentially.
Paramilitary wing of the Communist Party. I mean, even the Jewish Forward says that they're an anti-Nazi militia. That's true, but post-fact, because they were, before the Nazis were even around, they were still a paramilitary wing of the Communist Party, and they were wreaking havoc in Germany. They were actually pretty popular, but they were also wreaking havoc. And so when the Nazis, and that's not even the appropriate term because Nazi is actually an insulting term.
Does it mean like country bumpkin?
That's exactly what it means. And it was invented, or it was, it's not N-A-Z-I in English. It's like Ignaz in German. And it basically means country bumpkin. And it was a Jewish author who used that to discredit and demean and degrade the National Socialist movement.
But why do we have the Oshkosh Nazi and it's spelled the same way?
That's another interesting question. Or the Code of Hammurabi, which predated the Ten Commandments, and it's Hammurabi. It might be a coincidence. And so anyway, from Iraq. So anyway, the Antifa movement back then would go protest outside of these camps, not because they were murdering innocent people, but because communists would be rounded up for being violent and put into camps. And then Antifa would go protest against that. They took their rights away. But who were the communists? Overwhelmingly, they were Jews. We have a common theme throughout time here because we find something similar happening today. Remember Tom Alexandrovich, the Israeli tech guy who was arrested and sent back to Israel for trying to diddle a teenager? Okay, we just had another one, Michael Caruso in Florida. Florida has a law against pedophilia, and if you do things like that, they'll execute you. But this guy is too close to the chosen, so I don't know if they're going to actually execute him if he's found guilty. He called himself the Tickle Monster, and he's 67 years old. He was trying to molest, he was actually, I think, did molest a young boy. But see, what happens is if you, just like the Epstein cult, if you were to say, all right, you know what? Federal law, pedophiles, child traffickers, human traffickers, state-sanctioned execution. What would happen? Well, if you just started executing all the people involved, disproportionately, you would be executing Jews across the board. Israel is the #1 country for pedophilia. In fact, a lot of Jews, including Alexandrovich, go to Israel to escape having to face justice in any country.
Which is crazy, and we know this, like that they're doing this.
Well known. It's even an issue over there where it's within decent society over there because there is one. It's even an issue there. Some Israeli couple just recently got arrested because they were making porn with their kids. It's just everywhere. So that means that if you were to start rounding up the communists, you were rounding up Jews. you start rounding up the pedophiles, you start rounding up Jews. Now, already this probably makes a lot more sense. And then Antifa, which is a Jewish paramilitary group, goes and protests and makes a scene. And then historians tell us that it was the evil Nazis who put innocent Jews in camps, and that Antifa, if you ever even read about them, were actually the freedom fighters trying to free these prisoners from these evil camps. That's not what happened at all. And this was, remember, the Antifa was around before Hitler was around. And they basically were the paramilitary wing of the Communist Party, and they had attempted, their offshoots had attempted, to conquer Germany through direct Bolshevik-style assassinate the Tsar violence, and they were stopped. So then they started to utilize more subversive methods, like the Soviet Union talked about doing to defeat the United States, infiltrating education system, etc. This is what they did, and this is why. And
Robert Maxwell,
with the printing of textbooks. Yep, that's who tells us this history, or really tells us a false version of this history. So if you get into the 1930s and you look at the statistics, I have all this in my book, but you can verify this independently. The major institutions, law, healthcare, media, were run not exclusively, disproportionately by Jews. 80% plus for the theaters. For a lot of the higher positions of authority, like say the people that oversee the legal profession, it's like 75 to 80%. So and for a population of people that are like less than 1% of the population. So it's incredibly disproportionately represented. And if you read Mein Kampf, oh my God, he read Mein Kampf. Yeah, I read a history book. I did. I've read a lot of books.
Well, I always find it weird. I will say, like, as we're kind of going through this, right? Like, just again, like what we're discussing, is there's a lot of factual history to this stuff, and it is just looking up things objectively of what was happening. And it's interesting that, like, you can buy Karl Marx, you could buy the Communist Manifesto on Amazon, but you can't read Mein Kampf. So there's just like hypocrisy of, like, communism, we know for a fact has killed more people than fascism did, but yet you're allowed to read the manifesto of Karl Marx, but you can't read My Struggle. Like, and it's contradictory. So, like, if looking at history objectively, as any historian should do, and not have a biased opinion, you should be able to look at both sides of the struggle of both peoples who are, like, maybe not the forefront, but helping institutionalize some of these ideologies, and looking at both of their ideologies and thoughts. It's a little weird that you're not allowed to.
I believe that is well said. They used to teach it in school, but not so much anymore. It's actually even hard to find a good copy of the book. Mm-hmm. If you read the book, though, here's a great quote for you. You can find it online. You want to get the Murphy edition for the record, but you can find it and read it. It's like the only argument that people have against any of this is like, oh, you read Mein Kampf, and that's a Hitler book. Very good. He wrote the book. Well, he halfway wrote the book. What is your point? He was a Nazi, and so you're a Nazi? No, I mean, I read a book on nutrition recently. Does that make me a nutritionist? I just read a book. The only arguments these people have are fallacies and name calling, first 100%. Of all. Second of all, if you actually read it, it gives you a completely different perception of what we are told. So, like, for example, this is one of my favorite quotes from the book. He's got a favorite quote from Mein Kampf. I got a bunch of them, and I can give you the source of them in the book. Here it is. He says this: "It was worse than the Black Plague of long ago, and in what mighty doses this poison was manufactured and distributed. Naturally, the lower the moral and intellectual level of such an author of artistic products, the more inexhaustible his fecundity. Sometimes it was so far as to that one of these fellows, acting like a sewage pump, would shoot his filth directly into the face of the other members of the human race." What's he talking about here? Well, he goes on the next to say, "In this connection, we must remember there is no limit to the number of such people. One ought to realize that for one goeth nature may bring into existence 10,000 such despoilers who act as the worst kind of germ carriers and poison human souls. It was a terrible thought, and yet it could not be avoided that the greater number of the Jews seemed specially destined by nature to play this shameful part." And what he's talking about is the Jewish activities in the press, art, literature, and theater. One needed only look at the posters announcing the hideous productions of the cinema and theater and study the names of the authors who were highly lauded there in order to become permanently adamant on Jewish questions. Now, compare that to modern Hollywood, compare that to Netflix, compare that to what Disney has done with something like Star Wars, compare that to anything and everything that you see. I mean, I watched the new Malcolm in the Middle because I used to like that show as a kid.
Oh, yeah, so did I. And they have a fucking tranny. I just stopped watching it.
It's horrible. It's transgenderism. Not that I'm opposed to interracial international relationships, but it's like interracial relationships, transgenderism. And I don't know if you noticed this, but at the very end, it's Jesus having his head cut off.
I didn't finish it. As soon as my wife was like, I'm pretty sure that that's supposed to, because they had a boy, Jamie or whatever, right? And she's like, but now it's a girl. So we're like, what the fuck? I think some, we got people mad because I've talked about race mixing. It's clearly pushed by these same people, especially like black and white women. You see this within the porn industry. You've discussed stuff like this. It's like, well, why do white women want black people so much? No, Jews put them in pornos to do that. And then you're convinced that that's what they actually want when they actually are the least likely. White women are the least likely to race mix, especially with someone who is black. This is statistically proven. And I'm not I think it could work maybe with European and Asian DNA. And I think there's maybe benefits to that. But just because white people are less than 8% of the, give or take maybe 12% of the worldwide population, I think it's probably declining rapidly. Because I know a lot of people that have kids, but I also know a lot of people that don't have kids or don't want to have kids, and it just to on these statements of kind of talking about this stuff, I just believe that I want my great granddaughter or grandson to look like me, and you can clearly see images of myself, and I look like my great grandfather or my grandfather, right? And that's genetics. And if you do race mix with something that is outside of your race when it comes to especially Africans and Europeans or something like that, you literally inherently change your whole structure of what your children will look like, their genetics. And even people like Louis Farrakhan brought this up. He's like, as soon as you have one drop of black blood, you can't deny that he's black, essentially, right? And it's a similar idea too when you're talking about what is a Nazi also to these people, right? Because I get called a white supremacist and a Nazi because I openly speak out at the fact of what is happening to my nation and also my ancestral home where my ancestors came from in Europe, right? So I speak about these things, and I always say it's not hateful or even racist to want to stand up for your own people and their all cultural heritage and all that stuff. But then they call you you're a Nazi, you're a white supremacist. But the same people that created white supremacy, I believe, were the people that believe they were chosen by God. So it's who is the real supremacist? And the same people that say this, oh, you're a Nazi. What is a Nazi to them? Someone who wants closed borders, someone who wants to have children of their own race, which everybody else is allowed to and actually advocated to do so. It's someone that doesn't want to cut off a child's dick to affirm their gender, that doesn't want them on hormones, that doesn't want children being hooked on drugs. To a Nazi, to them is just what was completely normal 50 years ago.
If you watch the documentary El Dorado, which is on Netflix, and I think you can find it online for free, it's a recent documentary. No joke, what you just described is literally how a Jewish guy in that documentary describes Nazi Germany and why it was so evil. There's a Jewish guy in the documentary, an old guy, probably a Holocaust survivor. And he says, we used to listen to the video, and Hitler would come on and he's saying these things in the speeches, and he wants the families and the healthy kids, and he wants the men and women to get married and to have the clean streets and the no drugs. This man is crazy.
That's crazy.
It's in the document. It's not verbatim what I just said. I'm paraphrasing, but no, it is actually in the documentary. There's a Jewish guy who claims that those are the reasons, what you just described are the reasons why Hitler was so bad. So that
strong families, loving communities, looking out for your own, protecting your own culture and race and heritage of your people. And that's why I call it out so often on the show, and why I chose to use this platform and talk about some of these more taboo topics and stuff like that, because it's just I'm not going to just hold my tongue while you encourage everybody else to be if you can say black pride, you can say Asian pride, but as soon as you say the white one, you can literally be taken off platforms. I've had big accounts taken down or videos taken for just saying I am proud of what my ancestors accomplished, something that some other people never could have. So it's crazy to how they will project and say like every other person and race is allowed to be proud. You can be proud to be Jewish. And I would have no problem with that if maybe they weren't conducting some of this stuff. But like, it's still the idea of like, if you mention anything about pro-European, which they have now classified all as white because it was not like that before. But now because if there was no black people, there was no white people. Like if we didn't have contact with Africa, like thousands of years, in regards to like being closed in communities, it'd be like, oh, the Irish over there and the British over here. But now because they want to classify every European as white, now they're actually going to probably like invoke something where all white people are now going to collectivize, or at least are trying to, right? It's like,
that's the key to understanding history. And it's very similar to the Anakim that we talked about earlier, or Amalek or Edom. Is that you have these terms, these definitions that you can reapply them to anything. You can organize them in ways in which they apply to your eschatology to justify what you believe. And when you're right, white people did not really exist. Neither did black people or any other group of people outside of like strictly scholarly debates and discussions in books until relatively recently. If you were Greek, you were Greek. If you were Italian, you were Italian. If you were German, you were German. If you're French, you're French, etc. Yeah, there are people with dark skin. There's people with light skin. There's people that with light skin that don't consider themselves white. They consider themselves Jews. That's a subset.
Well, their genetic cluster is different. They've proven this now.
There's a couple of things. One, Netanyahu does not have that genetic cluster because he's from Eastern Europe. But yes, they also have a very high rate. This is really interesting. They have a really high rate of porphyria in Judaism or within the Jewish community, which is the vampire disease. Which might be something interesting to look into, considering that they're known as the bloodsuckers, and they do perform rituals of blood drinking out of the penis of a child. It's called the Metzed Bet Pei. I don't know how to pronounce it in Hebrew, but it's
and they give kids like herpes and shit. It's fucking gross.
Look at Michael Rappaport's face. Look at Shmuly's face. They clearly have pockmarked faces of some kind of sexual transmitted disease. As far as I'm concerned, they're like deformed, and they have a long history of incest as a result. But anyway, the point to all this is
tell her brought that up.
You're right about this in regard to whites, and I'll say that personally, the only way that people can dispute what I'm saying is to say either you're interpreting it wrong, which is texts and these things, or you're just a Nazi. It's like, I'm not a Nazi. I don't believe in National Socialism. I'm a constitutionalist. You're a white supremacist. Well, I don't really believe in white people, so it's kind of hard to be a white supremacist when I don't really believe in white people. And personally, when like a personal opinion, I'm not attracted to white people. I've only been attracted to Far Eastern folks. My wife is from the Far East. I'm not attracted to white people, and I don't really care so much about race mixing because it's not the issue to me. Isn't the race? It's the culture. It's the attitude. That's what's most important to me. So just for the record, that's like who I am, and I think that's probably why a lot of times.
Yeah, I've always been. There's some Japanese women, there's like pretty beautiful looking people.
I heard someone say you've got 1 to 10 in America, but if you come to Korea or Japan, you've got to add a few numbers to that 10 scale, which is
that's why I've always appreciated. We actually have a few fans that are like Japanese or I consider like the only true Canadians are those that are descendants of those that built the country, but like a Chinese Canadian, we have like fans, like we have fans of all walks of life and stuff like that. But at the same time, right, I do want to say like that the Japanese will never view you as Japanese though. Like that's what I push against a lot of,
I'm not.
Yeah, right. It's like I don't think an Indian guy can ever become Canadian because that ethnic identity of who created the nation. You can't just be like put on a costume. Like that's like our genetics aren't costumes and stuff like that. So it is, even if you like it, once it gets to the race mixing, that's where the question arises. But if I go have a kid with my wife in China, my kid, even if he was born on Chinese soil, wouldn't make my kid Chinese.
Sure. Well, at least how people might view them. Some people might view them as such. Some people might not. Other people might accept it if they're culturally compatible, which I think is usually what the issue is. But let's look at it this way in regard to both that issue and in regard to Weimar Germany. Think about it like this. If you were to read the writings of FDR or Truman, two U.S. presidents that presided over world wars and the post-World War period and the bombing of Japan, FDR believed, along with a Smithsonian scientist, this is really important, I think, for context. FDR, president, White House officials, the U.S. military, actually, I think it's in Leatherneck magazine, and the Smithsonian, or at least a portion of the Smithsonian, believe that not only Asian people, and in fact all non-quote white people, but Asian people in general and Japanese people in particular, were not only racially, like genetically inferior, but the Smithsonian and FDR believed that their skulls, like their craniums, were undeveloped and unevolved. Now, this is interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, if Hitler and the Germans were so opposed to non-white, non-European, non-Germans, why were they the ones that had a very strong contractual agreement with the Japanese? Don't call it, honorary Aryan. That's a stupid slang term that's been used to, I think, discredit what that deal really was. It was a strategic alliance. They didn't agree on everything. The Japanese thought that the Germans were too obsessed with the Jews, quite frankly, and the Germans told them, you better watch out. These people will get you. And the Japanese actually developed a plan. They said, okay, if they're going to get us, they call it I think it was called the Fulu plan or Fugu plan, I think. And they said, okay, well, we're just going to they're good at making money. The Germans said, yeah, they're really good at money. And this is a real story. This isn't, you can look this up, look up the plan. And the Japanese said, okay, well, if we just take all the Jews and we put them in like this little confined area and make them make us money. That was the Japanese plan to deal with the Jews, which I think is just unbelievably brilliant. But anyway, the point is, Washington saw the Japanese as inferior, completely inferior. And the Germans didn't. And if you read the writings of FDR and you read the writings of Truman, they weren't just men of their time. I mean, they were vile racists. And if Hitler was a racist, and that's why he's bad, then FDR and Truman have to be held to the same historical
I've heard
standard.
Truman say some crazy shit too.
He was an insane person. So was FDR. And FDR was tied into the bankers and et cetera, just like Churchill was.
Yeah, Churchill was a drunken fat fuck. Like he committed war crimes, like Dresden and shit. Yes. They bombed the living shit out of them.
Yeah, let's look at this. This is all important. We can go a little bit over if you have time.
Yeah,
a few minutes.
Yeah, we can do that.
Let's go through this and solidify the history of this real quick.
Yeah, I want to get back into a little bit of the Weimar Republic and some of these things that are happening in context. Yeah, let's carry on. I had another thought, but let's keep going.
Well, actually, it's connected to Weimar, because if you looked at, for example, they said this about the Japanese, and yet the Japanese in post-war studies had higher rates of literacy than Americans did. It's something like 98, 99% compared to the 95, 96% in the US. And it's funny because we did studies in Japan about this after the war, and the ones in the United States were wholly different. The studies here, you had to actually prove that you could read and write. In the United States, they simply asked people, can you read and write? Yeah. Can you? You don't have to prove it though. So they were, for all intents and purposes, they were more educated than the average American was, for the record. And Washington was far more, at the very least, more racist, if we're going to use that term, than the Germans were, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they did not, like, Adolf, like, he loved animals and stuff like that too, but did he not shut down a human zoo?
I don't know about that. I've never heard about that.
Oh, I've heard that, like, there was a human zoo, I think it was actually in Germany, and he shut it down when they took power. And
I've never heard of that before, no.
I've also heard that they had, like, one of the most diverse armies on Earth. Like,
they did have a very diverse military. Yeah, that's another piece of history that's really interesting. I mean, again, at the very least, if Hitler's bad because he's racist, then what is FDR? And what is Truman? And okay, so if you look at the history of this, you mentioned Dresden. This is important as well. The bombing of Dresden, they estimate 25,000 people died. Often that estimate is based on the number of people in the city at the time, about 600,000, and what they think they can extract from the record and the testimonies and the bodies, etc. However, many historians say that it's higher. Why? Because the context is there were 400,000 additional people that were refugees that were in the city when the city was bombed by the Royal Air Force. And they were crowded and cramped together. And just because there's no official statistical counter, just like there wasn't in most of the Jewish Holocaust narrative, they assume that those people must not have died in the same way that in the opposite direction, they assume everybody must have died in the case of the Jewish Holocaust. So they keep the number about 25,000. It's likely that it's closer to 100,000 plus in a single night. Now, just like the racist thing, compare that to the London Blitz. The London Blitz lasted approximately, 7-8 months? 40,000 people died. With V2 rockets, which were top of the line, 40,000 people. That's not a good thing. It's what Stalin said. It's a statistic. It's not a good thing, though.
Mm-hmm.
But if Hitler was bad because of the Blitz, which that's all I learned about in school, the Blitz, V2 rockets, then what was Dresden? At the very least, if you accept the official number, 25,000 in a single night, the Blitz was 8 months. This was a single night in Dresden.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what they did to Tokyo, the firebombing of Tokyo, which, the only place I've seen anybody talk about that is in the new Godzilla movie. Firebombing of Tokyo was 40% of the city was burned. They say about 100,000 people, civilians, were murdered in a single night. Then you combine that with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you're looking at over 250,000 people slaughtered in 3 cases in a single instance or in a single night. So
it's almost acted as if it's heroic.
Well, exactly, and it's
history,
especially Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that's more than the number of people the Red Cross, 271,000, document dying in the so-called camps. So I say so-called because they weren't what we were told they were. The Polish government said Auschwitz was a labor camp, not a extermination center. So in other words, if Hitler was racist, then FDR was racist, and if the Germans were bad for killing 40,000, then what do you call Churchill?
Yeah, and I'm not denying the Holocaust. I will not deny the Holocaust. I live in Canada. But it's like pools, wooden doors. There's some weird things that is like well documented that, just to have a nuanced perspective or whatever. But it's just so funny. But like they didn't need to bomb Japan. Like they didn't need to drop the nuke on them. The war was coming to an end. It was almost like they just wanted to test it.
Science experiment and a threat to the Russians. I believe it was a combination of those two things. But yes, the point is, you can question all of this, but you cannot question that other story that you just referenced. The only other example of that is in China. You can't question a lot of the atrocities that were supposedly committed against the Chinese, which were a lot of those were fabricated too. But anyway, I think that's.
But wouldn't Dresden be a Holocaust? Because that mean like what is that? What does it mean?
Mass death by fire. That's exactly what happened at Dresden and a bunch of other German cities, and the expulsion of the Germans, 14 million people displaced. That's
the Holodomor, like that we never ever taught about.
That's approximately 25% of the entire Ukrainian population, and that's on top of what happened in the more local Soviet Union. That's what happened around Moscow. They killed, just untold numbers of people, tens of millions, a lot of Christians. The first gulag was actually a monastery. Just like they set up the church or the temple or whatever they call it of the synagogue of Satan on the Cathedral of Christ, the Tower of Babel there. So anyway, that's important though, because if you look at like that documentary I referenced, this takes us back to Weimar, because if the issue was cleanliness and families and decent people, educated people, etc., and that is what you got with both the Germans and the Japanese. And not to say that the Italians weren't or the Americans weren't. It's just like that's at least the image of Germany and Berlin in the 30s. If like the issue is cleanliness and law and order, then it does take us back to Weimar, because Weimar was the very opposite of all of those things.
We're showing images for all the audio listeners. Like it was like pure degeneracy, like the stuff that we were reading about. I'm trying to cut a clip of it to put it it's like 20 minutes of just us talking about the different types of prostitutions. It's like a laundry. It's massive. It's like a scroll of how many different forms of prostitution they had. They had like women that were like outside prostitutes. They had women that were like inside, animals, mother-daughter duos. Like it's cross-dressing essentially, stuff like that. Yeah.
What you see on your screen right now is Magnus Hirschfeld. He is the German Jewish sexologist of the Institute of Sexual Science. And when the evil Germans decided to burn the great works of literature, I'm sorry, when the German students decided to burn the library of the Institute of Sexual Science, they built fires and threw the books into them. And we've been taught, I was taught in school that they burned the great works of European literature, which makes no sense if they were trying to save Europe. But we were told that in school. And then you go look at the photographs, and some of them you can't even show because you would get kicked off of YouTube.
Yeah, as you can see, one of the photos we're showing now up in the corner where they're looking through a lot of the material that they found at these institutions where they were literally conducting like transgender ideology, like essentially surgery transitions. Yeah. I have it cut off here because there's literally pictures of like it's pornography.
It's pornography. It's transgender manuals, like it's for surgeries and for ideology. They actually carried us a bust of Magnus Hirschfeld, the German students did, to the fires. That's what that image is there. They took a bust of him.
Oh, that's crazy.
Fires. Here is I believe this is from a postcard. It's from a publication in 1908. This is Magnus Hirschfeld, this fat Jew in a tutu. And he used to sign it. This is one of the ones from the archive of, I forget where I found this. I think it was in Berlin archive, maybe. But this is great for two reasons. One, he's in women's clothing, and he would sign it, "Greetings from the Scientific Humanitarian Committee." So they considered the work they did humanitarian. And just like Karl Marx, opposition to Hirschfeld's work was classified as anti-science.
Yeah.
Where have you heard that before?
That's what they do now, where it's like you don't believe in like the global warming or whatever, right? It's like you're anti this, you're anti that. It is kind of like, and it's just like the isms. Like there is obviously some evidence that like Leon Trotsky at least weaponized the word racist to browbeat people who are dissidents of the communist agenda. So all these feminism, communism, transgenderism, racism, sexism.
Oh, no, you're right. You're totally right. Racism, homophobia was Jewish guy. All of it. This is important.
Who invented homophobia? Because I've heard you reference it before.
The name up the top of my head, I'd have to look it up here in the book. I forget the name of the guy. Let's see if I type it in real quick. Homophobia. Let's see, homophobia. It's only in the book two times. George Weinberg.
Oh, of course. It's so fun. Their names are, Spielberg, like he's doing a spiel.
Spielberg, Sam Altman.
Yeah, that's so weird, dude.
Crystal Goldstein, Silverstein. Rubenstein, the guy that shot some guy that supposedly shot Kennedy.
Supposedly.
So I referenced earlier that this stuff is all well documented. Here's the Holocaust Encyclopedia. And it says, these are the key facts. Nazi university students destroyed books that they labeled un-German. I think that's a clever way of getting around the fact that they were porn and they were transgender texts, what we would call LGBTQ. And a lot of that wasn't just from the Institute. It was also from newsstands that were publishing pornography and homosexual.
Like right out in the open, like where you could open these books and you would see pornographic images.
Yep. If someone wants to email me, and I'll send you the image. I don't think we can show it on screen because it's too graphic, but I have the images in the book.
I gotta get that book, man. I want to get that book.
I'll get it to you. Don't worry. I'll get it to you.
Yeah.
These were German students. Okay. These are university students. It says many of the books that were destroyed were written by well-known popular writers at the time. They don't note that they were Jewish writers, which is funny because everything else is about how the Jews were targeted. But I guess if they mentioned that these were Jewish authors and what these books were, they weren't just un-German, they were smut and garbage, then it would be too obvious that the Germans had a justifiable reason to burn them. And it also says that there were other book burnings around Germany, which is something that I didn't even realize the context of, like the Berlin book burning and the other burnings, the subsequent burnings. It wasn't like a multi-year long practice where they had a bonfire every night. It's like a single instance, which is something that you probably heard me talk about on other shows. It's the same thing with the boycotts against German businesses by the Jews. That was
Germany Must Perish.
And Germany Must Perish was a book that was written about how the Germans need to just be sterilized and exterminated. And if you were to read about the anti-Jewish protests on April 1st, again, a single protest, but the Jews in New York were organizing protests in dozens of cities in the weeks previous to that. And Joseph Goebbels even says that these protests were the reason that the Germans decided to protest the Jewish businesses. So we've been lied to about the context of all of this, including the Kristallnacht story, which was because a Jewish terrorist assassinated a German diplomat. So
you want to give reference to the people that don't know about like what happened?
Yeah, of course. Ernst von Rath, a German diplomat who I think was still, he had some like royal blood. So he was more than just he was a diplomat. And he was assassinated by a Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew who was upset about the crackdown on illegal immigration, reportedly. And that's what triggered, this was in 1938. So this was several years after the onset of what would become Nazi Germany. And the German people, having had enough of this, chose to go out into the streets and protest. And it was actually Joseph Goebbels, and matter of fact, I could find the article. It's in my book. It's, I think, New York Times. Joseph Goebbels is the one that called for an end to the protests. And I believe in his diary, he even goes and talks to Hitler directly and says, look, we've got to put an end to this, because they like law and order. And Hitler said, well, let them get it out of their system tonight. And then tomorrow, we'll call for an end to it and tell people to stop. I mean, like I was in AP history. I was taught that the Night of Broken Glass was Germans were instructed by Hitler to go murder Jews in the street. Like that's literally what I was told in school. That is not what happened. I was literally told in school, told nothing about the assassination. I was told in school that the Germans were told to go out and to protest and to damage these Jewish businesses. People did that willingly without having to be told. It's kind of like one of the biggest movements today against Israel are young people. I don't know what gin it is, but it's young people. They're not being, for the most part, they're not being instructed to do this. People like you and I, we're not being instructed to see this. We're just reading books and realizing, oh, wait a minute, we were lied to. That's what was happening back then too. And those are the only two really big instances that are just pushed in every museum and every documentary and every story. And then they really don't have any other stories. Because if you get too close to the context of any of this, then what you're going to see you're going to see nudity. You're going to see transgenderism. You're going to see the borderline pedophilia. You're going to see the brothels.
Well, they did do this. There was like some of the prostitution that was going on, and what like was described by even French writers and people that visited Weimar Germany was like you could call a little girl on the phone and she would be delivered like literally like Uber Eats. And this was well documented. Or there was a French guy that he was making reference to, you would see the toothless hookers on the streets, even with their own daughters, where they would offer up a price for both or whatever. So, and that's why I was going to cut that clip eventually and just put it where I could on maybe YouTube and Rumble of us. It's 20 minutes of us breaking down just the prostitution of what different kinds of prostitutions were taking place. And it was children, like, 13, 14-year-olds. There was, men dressing like women, especially they would push this stuff within like children, especially at a young age, to have them cross dress, you could say. Oh yeah. And a lot of the hub of that was the El Dorado, and there were some other clubs as well that were eventually turned into an SA headquarters. And funny thing is, actually, Ernst Röhm, who was a well-known gay guy, he was good friends with Hitler, and Hitler, I think Hitler wrote, I don't know if it was a private writing he wrote, but he wrote that he said, like, I don't care that you're gay. You're my friend. The issue is I don't want that to be made public. Like, I don't want to push it on people. That's contrary to everything I was taught. Like, he didn't care that he was gay. He just cared that we don't want to teach that to kids. There's a which now people like it's recurring again. I don't want my daughter to be taught this subversive shit. When I went to school, it was one day in grade 6. That is it. And now, especially within Canada, because it's taken over by cultural Marxists and stuff like that, and activist judges and all sorts of shit, it's being pushed on children now, where they're doing pride events where there's dudes' balls coming out, like, and that's why I did that song for even the album, because I wanted to discuss how like we're seeing the reflection of something that happened literally like 100 years ago happen now.
Yes, and I gave this example earlier, I like that song, by the way. I gave this example earlier. If you were to sit down and say, look, we need to get rid of some of the people in our society that are causing problems, like Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And people like, say, all the Tom Alexandroviches, pedophiles and perverts. We need to get rid of people that run like OnlyFans and Pornhubs. That would be Radvinsky, who passed away. He was the owner of OnlyFans. Pornhub is essentially run by Solomon Friedman, who's a Jewish rabbi. Virtually all the porn companies, I have an entire chapter on this in my new book.
Yeah, we're bringing up images right now. It's everyone.
I can't confirm whether those images are accurate. I assume that they are, but in the book, I've documented individually each one of the porn companies and who they're run by, who they were started by. The same thing with Bumble and Tinder, etc. So if we were to say we want to get rid of all the porn and all the licentious behavior in society, and we're going to put these people in prison, who ends up going to prison? Jews. If we're going to say that we don't like pedophiles, execute the pedophiles, who's going to be executed? On average, it's going to be Jews. So this is the problem. And this is the historical issue in the context that's missing, is that the issue really was Jews at the time. And the issue really is today Jews, as much as it is Muslims or Christians or any other movement. The difference is you can claim that Muslims are behind everything. You're not allowed to point out that Jews are behind some things. This is a problem. It's a free speech problem. It's a factual problem. And for me, it has nothing to do with ideology. To me, it's like an autistic tic. I can't stand the fact that it's a factual thing to say that those book burnings were the burnings of smut, not great literature. That's a fact. And that changes the narrative quite.
That is a fact. You can look it up.
It's a fact. Everything that I've said tonight, unless I've prefaced by saying this is my opinion or after the fact, all of the things that I've referenced are facts, whether it's the Zohar, the Talmud, whether it's the encyclopedias that I've referenced about the temple. Everything that I've said tonight is everything in the book is actually pulled, almost everything, like 98% is pulled from Jewish sources on top of that. So it's not an opinion. It's a bunch of little details that when you put it together, provide you with the context for the history of World War II, history of World War I, the Weimar Republic, and what is happening today, which is Weimar 2.0. And if we decide as a culture, as Americans, Canadians, or anybody, Europeans, that we're going to put an end to this kind of stuff, what's going to happen again? The people that are going to be in the crosshairs are going to be the decent, good Jews who don't agree with this. Orthodox Jews don't back any of this stuff. They don't agree with the porn industry. And guess what happens to those Orthodox Jews? They get pulled up in the netting as well, and that's unfortunate.
Have you heard of Henry Macro? Macra? I don't know how to say his name. Have you heard of this guy?
No, I have not, no.
He actually is, I'm halfway through his one book. He has a book called The Illuminati, the Cult That Hijacked the World. And he is a Jewish guy that is calling out Jewish power and historical events that happened and how like feminism and all this stuff. And I got this, interesting. There's like parts about Hitler and Trump in here, orchestrated by two branches of Freemasonry. Jews is defined by the belief in Lucifer. So, and this is like a Jewish guy that calls out what is going on with Zionism and happening. And he's pretty compelling and done some great research and people can see it. Like it references kind of what we're talking about. And it's like crazy that if you speak about these things, that they want to label you anti-Semitic or that, oh, you just hate Jewish people, which is not true. I don't hate Jewish people because they're Jewish. It's just like, I don't stand by people who massacre children because of their beliefs, because they think that it's their right to the land. Even like if I stand up for Canadian values and heritage, I still don't, with the bad aspects, even though I do think it's been widely over exaggerated of what happened to the Native Americans. Like I didn't like that happened. And because I exist today of what my ancestors created, doesn't mean that I think that everything that the government did, specifically not the settlers and the people that came here, I don't justify the impacts of human life and what happened in the death and misery that was caused mostly because of governments, not because of people who came here for a better life or how America was built the same way. But then it's like, you do have a lot of Jewish people that speak out against this stuff and writing books about it and try to erase the idea of like that. Yeah, like they were raised in that environment, and he didn't even like it. He speaks about it.
I don't know who that author is, so I can't speak to that
Yeah.
individual book, but I can say that a lot of the books that I've read where I've learned these types of things are, again, from Jewish authors. Norman Finkelstein, for example, Holocaust industry. I don't agree with everything that he says, but he's a smart guy, and they call him all kinds of horrible names because he's Jewish. His mother, I think, is a, quote, Holocaust survivor, and he quoted his mother in the book. It's a great quote. His mother said, well, if all of these stories are true about Holocaust survivors, who exactly did Hitler kill? It's a great quote because it's true.
Because there's always like new ones. It's always
There's
like
new ones. The numbers are.
My grandfather survived. My grandma survived.
Well, let's look at why that. Let's look at why that is really quick. If you,
I'm not denying the Holocaust, Canada. Okay, CSIS and shit. Calm down.
Don't put him in jail. You can extradite me from Japan. Let's look at the book real quick again, and I'll show you.
Yeah.
I'll show you two things.
Well, definitely, I'll get you on for some other stuff too, because this shit is like just fascinating.
There's a lot more. It's never ending. We've gone through maybe like 4 pages of the book. This is an interesting quote. If you want to pause the show and read that about how the Jewish community exploits non-Jewish women. That's from a book written by a painter. But let's look at Yad Vashem right now. Yad Vashem is the official Israeli Holocaust Memorial organization museum. It's in Jerusalem, and they document all the Holocaust dead. This is not about the Holocaust. I'm just bringing this. I mean, it is, but it's not. It's not about numbers or anything like that. It's just about if you go.
Yeah, YouTube. We're not denying anything. YouTube.
What I'm saying is that the Yad Vashem website says that they've discovered as of last year 5 million names. Okay, well, let me just give you the 5 million. That would mean the 6 million is not true, but okay. That's not really the point. The point is, I'm concerned with how they got the names. And how they got the names, according to Yad Vashem, this is like the official group. They got them through new technologies like AI, artificial intelligence. Okay. They say that these names are compiled by the AI. They say they're designed, they use specially developed algorithms. It says it right here in Yad Vashem's website to discover these names. Okay. And then you go down and you read about exactly, they have a link to it. Like, how do they categorize these? How do they acquire these names, or how do they acquire the number of people that have died? They do it through pages of testimony. Okay, what's a page of testimony? This is all on their website. A page of testimony is a primary source, a document of an individual who went missing, who's like a family member. You can fill these out, and they are considered one of the 5 million. Okay, well,
so it's a claim.
It's a claim, yes. It's not. You don't have to document it. I mean, here's one from the Yad Vashem. I think this is from their website. Or maybe the Holocaust Encyclopedia. They give you an example of what it looks like. This one's actually pretty filled out, but a lot of them are not even filled out. But if you were to translate the Hebrew, you get a really interesting translation. It says that this is directly from the document here, you can see. If you translate it, it says the memory of all the Jews who fell, fought, and rebelled, and their helpers and their positions and their communities that were destroyed because of this, evil anti-Jewish Nazi force. Okay, so that tells us that these pages of testimony can include, at least what I can ascertain from what I'm reading here, these pages of testimony can include people who didn't even die, just people that were inconvenienced by what Germany did or didn't do, for that matter. Okay, then you keep reading and you go down through what they describe as the Wannsee Conference. And that's the 1942 conference where they discuss the final solution. And there's not a single mention of extermination. The entire thing is about an immigration policy with the immigration, the word immigration, to immigrate people out of German territory. And that's actually what founded the modern state of Israel through both the...
Well, I was going to say, didn't they originally want to send them to Madagascar? That's why I heard it. And then the French and the British controlled much of Madagascar. And then so they was it in, is it not the Balfour Declaration where they had it written down that they were going to send the Jews to Palestine, essentially? Was it like,
so there was Balfour in 1917 and there was Amara in 1933. Balfour was the declaration from Lord Rothschild of giving this land, this territory, to a Jewish settlement. And the Havar Agreement, which I have copies of the actual document in the book, high quality, high resolution scans. The Havar Agreement is like a contractual agreement between Germany and the Palestinian Authority, basically the British Empire. And they were discussing trading materials and money between Germany and Palestine, mandatory Palestine. And that they were utilizing this as basically and there were actually Jews who said this at the time, it's basically an open air concentration camp for Jews. A lot of Jews did not want to go to Israel, or what would become Israel, because they thought it was a new camp. And that's essentially what it ended up becoming, especially they built this giant wall around it. And when they had this agreement that was played out over the next few years, it was through 1933 onward. By 1942, the pages of testimony we just read and the Wannsee Conference that we read, it documents two things. It documents that Jews that disappeared in Germany that you just didn't hear from, many of them actually went to Israel. They weren't murdered. They were literally just transported to Israel.
And then they claim that they're part of the hula.
Yes. Yeah. There is actually a woman who was in Europe. She's Jewish. This is in the newspapers. She's Jewish. She was in Europe. I'd have to look up the name. It's in the book. I forget her name. She was in Europe and she had kids and a husband. She left her kids and her husband because of the quote Holocaust. And she came to the United States where she married I think she married another Jewish guy. And I'm pretty sure she was involved in like the porn industry. And then once the war was over, she went back to get her kids. But she could be potentially classified as someone who died in the Holocaust. Anybody, if you were in Brooklyn, you could be a Holocaust survivor because you were alive at the time. That's how they create these numbers. That's how they create these statistics. And it's very
I think I've heard even rabbis say this.
Oh, yeah. Several rabbis have said it. In fact, they say that they've created these numbers to obtain sympathy from the world. And plus, you could look up the Nuremberg Conference where they were literally crushing the testicles of Germans to get confessions of something that they didn't do. I mean, there were German statisticians that were high level in government that had never even heard that there were that many Jews that were being targeted, like there were that many Jews involved in any kind of program. So it's just ridiculous.
Well, that's what I heard. It was one specific, I don't know if like how true this is, but it was one or two specific people that they essentially tortured to get to admit that
very few.
It wasn't that many during the Nuremberg trials. And so, yeah, essentially they were crushing their balls and torturing them to elicit a confession.
Let's see if I think I have that article in
Testicles.
My book. Yeah, testicles crushed. Here. That's where it was.
Yeah.
Testicles crushed. Americans tortured Germans to extort confessions, and they had their testicles crushed.
People will say anything if they're having their testicles crushed.
Yeah, you probably would. But I want to point out something else. This isn't just a Jewish Holocaust thing. I was wrong about one thing that I've said in regard to all of this recently on my show the last few months since I wrote this book, that Israel or Germany or the U.S. are the only places, or let's say the Holocaust, the only thing that you're not allowed to legally question. It's actually not true. I learned that China has laws against questioning the revolutionaries that founded the Communist Party, the people that were behind the revolution, like Mao, for example.
Do you think there's a guy named, what was his name? Israel Epstein that was involved with Mao? You heard
I've
this?
heard that. I don't think they were more involved in publishing and promoting communism there to an English audience, but yes, they were. It's great. It's
what
fantastic.
A name.
Yeah, Israel Epstein. China also has a law. This is important in context. China has a law against questioning historical atrocities. So one of them would be the Imperial Japanese marched into Nanking, the time the capital, and massacred 300,000 or 200,000 Chinese. I see that all the time in Japanese social media, and there's a lot of Chinese accounts. You got to apologize. I finally looked it up because I was curious, and the way in which they obtained that number to convict one of the Japanese commanders, Matsui is his name, was they relied on the same kinds of testimony that they relied on at Nuremberg. But here's the interesting thing. We know that we have the actual documentation from like German statisticians, and we have the documentation from the Red Cross and other sources. So actual documentation is ignored in favor of stories and testicle crushing. It's the same exact thing actually in China, where they say 200,000 died in the Tokyo tribunal. The Nanking tribunal was 300,000. But if you read the actual statistical report from Nanking University, written by a Westerner named, his name was Smith, Symthe, the report actually documents, they say it's slightly underreported, about 31,000 people, not 300,000. There weren't even that many people in the city at the time. But China has made it illegal to question stories like that.
Which is that's absurd that you're not allowed to just question numbers alone, right? It's just such a bizarre thing. And I'm not questioning it. Okay, Canada, it's 6 million, whatever. It's just, it is crazy how they're like, they will do this and it doesn't make sense. Like, you should be able to, but then if you were to be like, only because communists do that. They're like, only a few million people were like killed during the Bolshevik Revolution, not like 60 million or whatever, right? And then that's, nobody cares. The same thing of like, it's just a weird once you look at history of what we're allowed. And it's like, you could dress up like a communist for Halloween, nobody would care. But if you dress up like a Nazi, literally they'll burn you in your apartment alive. Like they're like that one guy that got arrested for it or whatever. Or now you have Shiloh Hendricks that said the N-word and she's like essentially being convicted of saying the N-word, right? To an illegal rapist, essentially. Like, it's just, they have bizarre stuff that we have going on. We can like draw this to a close soon. But yeah, I would definitely get you back on the show if you want to, if there's anything else you want to cover. I see you flipping through.
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff, but there's some headlines there about the reparations. And I was trying to find the article.
How much money is Germany given to Israel by, like, it's
just ungodly amounts. And I think Finkelstein's book had documented it when it was years ago. It was like, it's billions of dollars, I think.
I think they do the similar thing with the indigenous communities in Canada. They're handed $34 to $60 billion a year. And most of it is not going to help the so-called, like, these oppressed indigenous people. And their chiefs are laundering it through the government and stuff.
You are right. That's exactly what was happening in the United States a couple of years ago when we were talking more about the reparations for, quote, black folks. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go to, quote, black folks. It goes to the groups and organizations that run them. A lot of them are actually run by Jews.
Just like BLM.
BLM was a Marxist movement. In fact, I can show you that real fast. If I type in BLM in the book, we'll pull up the original section here. Let's see. That's the end of the book. Oh, here it is. Here's this. This is a giant newspaper headline. It says Black Lives Matter. And if you zoom in real close on it here, because it's kind of small, we are Jewish organizations and synagogues from across the racial and political spectrum, from different streams of Judaism, whose members trace their lineages from countries around the world. We speak with one voice when we say unequivocally, Black Lives Matter. What you'll learn is if you look at the history of Black Lives Matter, they throw some fat black women up there to make it appear as if, you know, they're the ones in charge. And they admit, Patrice Cullors, one of the founders, admits that they're a Marxist organization. It's not an opinion that she actually
admitted that to Jesse Peterson or whatever. Jesse
yes, she did. Yes, she did. Yeah. We are and Marxism is not a Gentile movement. We'll put it that way. But there's a bunch of groups. There's a bunch of movements. Here's another one, Indivisible. You could look this one up in the Jerusalem Post or in the Times of Israel. Indivisible was founded by two Jewish people. They're a couple. And their names are Leigh Greenberg. So we got some more green there.
Yeah.
And I forget what the other woman's name, or the husband's name is, Ezra Levin. But they are
like Ezra Levant, who runs Rebel News. Interesting.
They are behind dozens, if not 60 or more, social justice movements. And
they do the same right and left too, because we have the left-wing media that is controlled by these same sort of people, but then they have like the controlled opposition, right-wing media. There's Rebel News is in Canada, it's in Australia, stuff like that, and it's run by this guy Ezra Levant. And then they're insider information, and then they're like on one side painting a picture of, you know, immigration and stuff like that into Canada. And then on the other end, they'll paint another picture. And you have that Irish guy, he's an Irish nationalist. And he was like, I don't talk to Jews. And he just kept saying that. And Ezra Levant kept trying to interview him.
Oh,
and you're
yeah,
like,
I remember that.
yeah, that's like good for that guy. He's like, went viral for it. Just like the clip of that, just be like, I don't talk to you guys.
You know how I found this? I found this out of curiosity. I was watching George Floyd as well, but I think it was what was I watching? What was that guy in Florida in Sanford? The black kid with the Skittles and the tea. It was kind of a gangster.
Carmelo Anthony? No, he stabbed.
No, it wasn't Anthony. This is a while ago. Anyway, I remember watching the protest against whatever that was. They pretended like the Hispanic guy was white, and they changed his photograph on CNN. That story I remember watching because I lived in Florida. I wasn't too far from the city that happened in. I remember watching the protest, and I saw these people that had these orange vests on, and this was however long ago that was. It was a long time ago. The orange vest on, and they had yarmulkes on their head. I thought, what? And then I saw the same thing during George Floyd. I found the pictures recently, and I put them on my hard drive. Where I'm like, what is that? And I started looking it up, and I came across Indivisible, and it's a Jewish group that runs all these protest groups that are supposed to be, you know, pro-black, pro-women. There's even Code Pink's another one. It's a more pro-women movement. They're like 75% Jewish. You know, all the founding feminists were Jewish. What was the woman's name? Shulamith Firestone, Robin Morgan, Betty Friedman. Those are just a couple of examples. So I started looking into it, and I found there's actually like these Jewish groups, like the Hebrew International or Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, for example. Yeah, they're literally a Jewish group, like an NGO, that facilitates the movement of immigrants into countries. They're the ones that are facilitating the immigration into the United States through the southern border, and probably into Canada too.
Look what's happening in Spain too. That the like thousands of Moroccans, and then there you have Red Cross there feeding them, and it's the majority men. Like it is majority military age men.
We can read something similar to what's happening today in those examples again in some book that a painter wrote. The Jews were responsible for bringing Negroes into the Rhineland with the ultimate idea of bastardizing the white race, which they hate, and thus lowering its cultural and political level so that the Jew might dominate. I mean, it's not a matter of my believing or disbelieving or liking or disliking what Hitler wrote or represented, whatever that actually was. It's just that when I read this in the book, and then I see it happening around me, and then I point it out and say, well, that's strange because what he wrote is happening almost verbatim what he said. Then I'm wondering why people get so upset at me. As a Nazi, you just call you names. Hitler, a Hitler lover, a low IQ anti-Semite. Those,
Nick
like,
Fuentes.
Maybe this is a good thing to end on. Calling people names, which is a Marxist tactic, as you pointed out, this is not an adequate or acceptable way to debate or refute information. If you want to say, well, you're taking things out of context, okay, that's a valid argument. If you want to say, you know, maybe you hate Rabbi Shmuley, as if that's a bad thing, which I do. I hate Rabbi Shmuley. I think he's a vile, disgusting, subhuman animal demon. I don't know what he is, but he's not human as far as I'm concerned. It's because he's Jewish. No, it's because he's a vile creature. But if you want to say that about anybody else, it's obviously acceptable. You can say, let's ban the Quran, let's burn the Quran, and let's kick the Muslims out, let's deport all the Muslims.
You can say the most abhorrent shit about white people. There is like literally so many articles. I have showed this. I even put one of my songs is called The Anti-White Agenda, and I was just proving the hypocrisy that like, oh, we're not allowed to be proud of ourselves. And what I used for the video was like hundreds of articles that are essentially painting white people as the villain. They have privilege. There should be a white Holocaust, a genocide. Like they literally, this is not, you can look this up. There is literally thousands of articles written that are essentially anti-white racism, where they say the most egregious shit about what they should do to white people, how they should kill white people, rob white people, like how we shouldn't exist. That, and then because they can create the identity for us, so to speak, right? Then it's like, well, you're now saying that about my daughter, about my family, right?
And for some reason, it's acceptable, or it's even in some way if you're talking political parties, it's even kind of mandatory in a way to believe that, even if you are quote unquote white. I mean, most of the intolerable Democrats and intolerable liberals are like white women. So it's very strange. I think that on that note, to get to conclusion, we should add one additional point of reference here. And that is, if you were to look at, say, the Democrat Party, I wrote another book called Liberty Shrugged, which was really a look at.
I'd like to get that at some point too.
In that book, I talked about the Democrat Party and how, like, the idea of white supremacy, for example, is largely an invention of the Democrats. And how it goes is this. Remember when Joe Biden said that if you don't vote for me, you ain't black? That was a great statement.
Yeah.
Well, this is not an opinion. Like, you can find political articles in the National Archives, political cartoons. If you don't vote for Democrats, you're not white, was one of the slogans and one of the ideas. In other words, if you don't vote for the nicely dressed Southern white man, then you are the party of Negroes. That's how they used to paint the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
When you learn that the so-called white slave trade was also just as Jewish as it was white, then you realize that the idea of white guilt and white supremacy is not only an invention, quite literally, of these people, an ideological invention. It's also a byproduct of the attempt to shift responsibility from one guilty group of people, if we're looking at groups of people historically for being guilty for something, onto another group of people. It's what they do to Muslims. It's all the Muslims. It's what they do to white people. It's all the white people.
Yeah, the word slave comes from Slavic, when white people were enslaved by the Ottoman Empire. Like, that's factual. That's why it's so funny when, black people want reparations and money and free things.
Who taught them reparations? The same people that are asking for reparations for something that happened in the 40s.
Yeah, and it's this, and it's the same thing of the idea that they need to hand over money for with the indigenous, even all of these events of the past that none of us alive today had anything to do with, whether they're over exaggerated or not. And now it's like, why we have to pay for this, the sins supposedly of our fathers and all this stuff, and it's just it's like it's a projection of them, and then shifting guilt over to the people that it's essentially like when they're calling you things like Nazi and white supremacists or whatever, when they use these terms and these isms, it's because they want to dehumanize you so they can kill you.
That's essentially what it is, or it appears that way. Look what I have here on the screen. This is the Jerusalem Post, acknowledging that U.S. Jews contribute to half of all the donations of the Democratic Party. That's just one source. The Times of Israel, this is more recent, 79% of U.S. Jews voted for Kamala Harris, according to the largest preliminary exit poll. This means that Jews are the liberals. Like, they argue and brag that they are the inventors of social justice and
liberal democracy.
Rights, liberal democracy, exactly. And in fact, there was a great study, I think it's in this section of the book here. Maybe it's in a different section. There's Pew Research, for example. Half of U.S. Jews describe themselves as liberal. There's references to that in the Encyclopedia Judaica. I have another study that I think it's called Chosen for What? And it's about how they're behind it's like a religious institution study, how they're behind the things like environmentalism, as abortion. All these things are considered liberal Jewish ideas, and LGBTQ and homosexuality is a thing they brag about today. Tel Aviv's the gay capital of the world, and we don't throw gays off buildings here like the Arabs do, which is like a good thing to Christians. I thought Christians also didn't like gays or something. But anyway, the point is, the Democrat Party is the party economically anyway and ideologically of Jewish billionaires and Jewish supremacists. The Republican Party is the party, a small percentage, or maybe a large percentage perhaps, of money also economically comes from these people, but they're more the spiritual party of the Jewish supremacists and the Jewish elitists. So both parties are victim to this corruption and this pollution.
There's no political solution.
No, there is not. That's what genuinely concerns me. There is not a political or a vote. You saw what happened to Dan Blazarian.
Dan Blazarian.
They literally took away 2,000 of his votes, just right out there in the open, just stripped away 2,000 of his votes away. Don't know anything about him. Don't really care about the election. I think Randy Fine's a traitorous scumbag, but the point is,
yeah, I've listened to Dan Bilzerian quite a bit, and as much as like I don't like his past endeavors of what he was doing because he was just a rich guy, right? Like essentially, but he's saying some real shit and talking out and like exposing a lot of this stuff. And maybe you need some of those type of men that like he was addicted to, like he was addicted to sex and stuff like that, and supposedly left all that behind to try to become a better person. So if that is true and we can trust any of these people, that I do give them credence when it's people that are like, okay, like I'm choosing to take a moral ground here and say like enough is enough. This is crazy. And especially people that have the money and the means to do it. Something like how Elon could have done something. And then it seems like he said something about the anti-white agenda. He made reference to some of this stuff. And then he's had to go with Ben Shapiro to like the Holocaust Museum, like to Auschwitz. It's a little weird.
See,
Grok went like Mecha Hitler on everyone.
A lot of this stuff, you alluded to it earlier too. We both alluded to it. A lot of this stuff about like being pro-white and embracing whiteness, I think it's all part of the scam because they create this caricature of like white supremacist Nazis, which is not accurate or historically in context. And then when people are like, well, I'm tired of being called racist. I'm tired of being, replaced. I'm tired of having, people that they don't look like me. They're not from here, put into positions of like authority. And I'm done with this. So I'm going to embrace whiteism. Like they're creating the thing that they say that they hate, because ultimately these people by these people, I mean Jews as much as I mean non-Jews, authoritarians. They need this perceptual, universally agreed upon enemy. They need this image of like white Nazis, that they want closed borders and that's a Nazi thing, or they want families and that's a Nazi thing. Because that term that is applied to people is obviously irrelevant and has no meaning. It's just a label so we don't discuss what the person is saying.
They need an enemy, right? It's like the far left created the far right because they kept pushing and pushing and pushing, right, and like pushing all these ideologies down our throat. And then eventually we're like, there was a lot of people like myself that were very much in the middle, and we're like, I just want to live and let be. I was more of a libertarian. If I labeled myself anything, because I don't like political parties, I don't align with politicians, like they're just parasites, right? But then they made me go that way where I'm like, okay, so I'm a Nazi because I want my kids to be white and I want my country to stay ethnically the people that created it, and I want closed borders, or I want proud families and communities, not garbage and filth and drugs everywhere. And then according to them, that's being a Nazi. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, you'll notice too that they also, I think one of the first things the Germans did when the Nazi party did when they took power was address the opioid problem. And then they've burdened Hitler. He was a drug addict. He was a disgusting drug addict. It's like, well, he had war injuries and he was on painkillers because of that. That's different than putting drugs onto the street for children, which then you look at what's happened in the U.S. today, and who's behind that? It's Purdue Pharmaceuticals. And it's the opioid crisis created out of what happened in Afghanistan with the poppy fields. It's literally the same story, just being told again.
And then the Sackler family, same kind of thing. And I think that they manufactured some of that stuff. Like, I'm sure maybe the Nazis were a little bit on meth, but I think that also could be a projection, because there's that video of the famous video of Hitler, like rocking back and forth. If you actually look at it, this is during the Olympics when Jesse Owens literally said that he was treated better in Nazi Germany as a black man than he was in America. But that video is sped up. You can clearly see people in the background moving and shifting fast. And it's like he's probably sitting there like just chilling out, and they sped it up to make it look like he was on drugs.
Yeah. And when you start noticing things like that, the only conclusion a rational person can come to is that this evidence is being fabricated. These stories are fake. They're false. We're being lied to. Why?
Yeah.
Then I think a lot of people that are rational, that come to that question, then it splits off into two other directions. You can either choose to remain rational, or you can become emotional and embrace this like fake white supremacist, nationalist, new Nazi, whatever this movement is, anti-Israel movement, which is largely controlled by Israel, as far as I can tell. So you have to remain rational, because this is actually what genuinely scares me, is that what's going to happen is or something equivalent to this, there is going to be a new Hitler type figure, and they're going to be painted falsely as being anti-Jewish and we got to stop Israel. Imam Dani's painted as a radical Muslim, but he's really just like a Mossad agent. His entire team is Jewish. Like literally, this entire team is Jewish, with maybe very few exceptions.
Well, who created communism again, right? So
that too, yes. And so I think that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a figure like that, and they're going to get a lot of support and attention, and they're going to be a Trojan horse. So I don't support when there's a movement that says down with Israel, we're cutting ties with them. I'm not going to support them, because I'm pretty sure, without even seeing it, I'm pretty sure before the fact, I don't have premonitions. I don't see the future, but based on history and based on what's happening today, I think that they're going to create and manufacture this new Hitler, whatever that is, whatever that means. And it's going to probably take us into the final phase of the Greater Israel Project. They're probably
problem reaction solution,
the larger war. A problem reaction solution. So yeah, whatever resistance you find to this stuff that as a listener you may or may not be interested in, I don't buy the resistance either. I'm not part of the BDS. I'm not part of the the Nazi party. I don't believe in white people. I'm just like a historian. Like I'm just interested in history. I just read books, and a lot of it isn't even that kind of history. It's just like occultism. That's my specialty, mythology, anthropology, and I read stuff in that, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Akhenaten was a monotheist, so that's before the Israelites. So then that whole idea of the monotheistic God and Ten Commandments being the foundation of Western civilization, that's wrong. So like everywhere you look, the story comes apart at the seams.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. I would definitely like to get you back on the show. Yeah, it's just so funny. And I figured we'd go quite a while. That's why I wanted to make sure when we were talking about doing it before that we had enough time to discuss all these things. And that's why I enjoy having you on the show, is because you come at things objectively. And I try to. I am like a little bit pro my people, just because I see what's happening and I don't know what the fuck the future holds, right? Because like Canada is getting fucked pretty bad. And all these crooked politicians, and we have like half of our people that are claiming to represent us or speaking foreign languages in our House of Commons and stuff, right? So it's quite concerning, considering I have a child in this world, and I don't want them to be a persecuted minority in the country their ancestors built. That's like one of my biggest stances. But that's why I enjoy talking to people like you, is like you come at things objectively, and like myself, I have read a lot of stuff over the years and different conspiracies and folklore and legends. And it does seem like these things are reoccurring. And it is this thing where I look at everything with a skeptical eye, and I will never there'll be people that will jump on board with like, say, a figure like Nick Fuentes. And then you start to see him spiral and you start to realize, oh, okay. And then it's like, I've never done that. Other than like, even I don't fully trust someone like David Icke, but I respect him a lot, and I've listened to him a lot throughout my life. But would I worship him in a regard of like how people worship like Jesus or the chosen people, because Christians do that too? No, I would never do that, right? It's just like to worship an individual and to put all your faith in somebody, I think is wrong and naive. Right. So it's looking at things objectively. That's why I enjoy having you on the show. I definitely bring you back on because there's many other questions I would like to ask about, like the metaphysical, about folklore, about all that stuff. But if there's anything you want to add, and then we're going to bring it to a close.
Yep. I would recommend people go look at Sanhedrin 59a that says Moses commanded us a law. Rabbi Yohanan says a Gentile who engages in Torah study is liable to receive the death penalty. And if you're a Christian who believes that the Schofield Bible's interpretation of Genesis 12 is accurate and that's all that matters and the New Testament doesn't matter, and that you should bless Israel because then you'll be blessed, well, according to the rabbis, that is actually grounds for your death. So I find that to be a gross irony, and one of the most evident pieces, the most obvious pieces of information, of evidence that this whole thing is a manufactured hoax. And I think that the origin of a lot of this recent Christian resurgence is purely Israeli propaganda, because even if they can bring you back to Jesus, ultimately you're brought back to the Bible, and then you're brought back to we got to bless Israel. So you might think that you're opposing evil and you're embracing Jesus, but they've created a false image of Jesus. And then they also condemn you for reading that same Bible, at least the Old Testament. So this whole Christian resurgence, Reclaim America, or maybe in Canada too, maybe in Europe too, I think is itself also Israeli propaganda. And I think it's important to remain objective by also stating that I'm not a fan of the Muslims, not a fan of any group or any organization of people. Everything that I've shared with you tonight is from documented sources, many of them that we've shown you, and you've shown some things that I don't even have in the book. If people have questions or comments or concerns, you can email me and we can have a dialogue. If you're going to say bad things and call me names, like, I'm just not going to respond to it. It's irrelevant and it doesn't get to me because I really just don't have, maybe I'm like a sociopath in a sense, because I don't have any emotions on it. You're an anti-Semite. Okay, you're an anti-Gentile. You're a low IQ anti-Semite. Well, I'm a high IQ anti-Semite. What is that? It doesn't matter. Screw you. I don't care. I've got better things to deal with, to talk about, to read. So that's where I come from. I really don't have a personal bias. I'm just interested.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I want everyone obviously to go shout out, to go support you, and I'll get you to tell you where to find them. Someone in the comments. Thank you to all the people watching. We had, including Rumble, probably over 150 people watching the entire time. So we appreciate all you guys that watched this live and commented. And one guy said, hell yeah, you guys could do a wild Halloween show. We always do Halloween vibes. We'll be getting there once we get into the season. But yeah, maybe I can see if you're around even end of September, October. And because I know there's a lot of like fun paranormal aspects that we've kind of discussed. Even we discussed some stuff for like 20 minutes last time or something. But I think bringing you back on to maybe do something that's not as serious, I guess you could say, and have a little fun with some of the folklore and paranormal stuff that has gone on, even if it does cross the bridge of taboo and controversial subject matter.
We could talk actually about the origins of Halloween if you'd like. That would be fun. I love that.
Oh, topic. Yeah. I would definitely do that. Let's actually do that. I'll get you on the books and we'll talk. But yeah, tell them where to find your stuff. For all the people on Strange Brew, please support us. Share it, like, comment. We are censored and we have had issues on YouTube. Fingers crossed this will stay up because we just got monetized after spending a lot of years not being able to do that. And half of our content won't be able to make money anyway because some of the stuff that we've chosen to cover. But this is why we need people like you to share Ryan's content, mine, Strange Brew, and help us that way with even the free things. You can join the Patreon and support us there. It would be appreciated. We have a lot of uncensored content videos that you'll never get only on Patreon, but it's like support independent creators. It means a lot. Support my new album, all that stuff. It means more than you think. And I'm sure, Ryan, you also feel the same. So like tell people where they can find you and support you.
Well, first of all, I'm not a sociopath. I'm just joking and saying that I don't really have emotions to be concerned about names. Anyway, yes, thank you for having me on the show. My website is tstradio.info. That is tstradio.info. Pretty simple. I don't have a lot of social media because for many reasons over the years, I've been kicked off of all of platforms. It could have been for comments on Christianity. It could have been for comments on a political party, many different reasons. I do have Facebook, which is almost completely banned now. And
I just got banned at 40K. I had 40,000 people on Facebook, and they're like, "No."
Way more than me, and I can't even post videos now. X is the only thing I'm really active on.
I have seen that. Yeah,
find me there. The links are on the website. My archive 5 nights a week is on the website. It's free. There are Spreaker, which is the platform advertisements that are inserted. Yeah, Spreaker's great actually. And they put advertisements in there. If you don't like them, then we offer a subscription service where you get access to the ad-free version of the show. Otherwise, you can still listen for free. There's just ads. But we are not sponsored, as you can probably imagine. I've been on a bunch of networks, been kicked off of all those networks. One recently for quoting encyclopedia. So and reading the Bible, actually, that was considered off limits on the network because a guy who had a tiny hat on was upset by it, literally. So independent, completely independent. And I hope that you'll check out my show. And if you enjoyed this content tonight, maybe you won't enjoy the other episodes. If you didn't enjoy tonight, and maybe you agreed with some things, you might find that a lot of my shows are unrelated to this entirely, and you'd actually enjoy them about other subjects. So tstradio.info, rdgable1991@gmail.com. And my books are on the website too. Protocols of Goyim is what we discussed tonight. And my other books, Liberty Shrugged and Occult Arcana, which is an enormous encyclopedia of occult lore. It's all on the website.
Yeah. So yeah, support Ryan, because like I've said to you before, you are one of the most knowledgeable people I've found. There's people that are like, they have niches when it comes to certain subject matter, but especially the occult and folklore and stuff like you. I've listened to you for a couple of years now, and you've covered some crazy stuff. Like I want to keep up with your show a little more, but I've heard you actually on other shows more often. And that's why I decided to originally email you, was I think something I heard you on Tinfoil Hat or some show like that. And I was like, and I only do that often. Like it's very rare. We usually get people inquiring about coming on the show. And a lot of our guests are just like people emailing me. We have the psychic that you might be interested in or whatever. But there's rare people that I actually will reach out to and want to get on the show. And you were one of those people. And I would be looking forward to getting your books, and then also to have you back on the show. And because I know that you are a wealth of knowledge for not just what we're talking about tonight, but a lot of other stuff. So
we could talk about you know what we could talk about would be good for Halloween. We should talk about the origin of your vampires and your werewolves, and kind of some of the both science and mythology behind it. That kind of stuff is really fun for me.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. I'm looking forward to it. And all you guys support the stream, all that good stuff. I never know how to end these. So make sure to stay strange and support independent content and music and all that stuff. People that are actually, putting their neck out there to talk about some of this more taboo and controversial subject matter. So yeah, stay strange. We thank you guys for watching.